As is usually the case, please tell me if you can see me and you can hear me, and then we'll get on with it. If you're wondering why there is a somewhat unusual background behind me, well, I'm traveling again. There's nothing pernicious here, this is just coffee. But I am on travel. I woke up in Texas early in the morning. I was in California prior to that, and now I'm in Colorado on the outskirts of Denver. And from here I'll go to California again early Saturday morning. So I have one more day in Colorado, a bunch of meetings tomorrow, and then I am ready to go back. The idea behind this conversation today is to answer some radical questions. I bring this stuff up, and um, I sort of have a comparatively specific way of looking at reticles, whether these are precision reticles or LTVO reticles or anything like that. And I never quite know how far I should take the reticle discussion. With the idea being that, because I also design reticles for a few companies, when I criticize reticles that are not mine, I'm I don't want to be perceived as just criticizing reticles that somebody else made. Reticles are very individual. They're sort of an eye of the beholder in many ways, but I have there's a method to my madness, and I have my ideas. Okay, I know there are a few people here. Please put something in the chat box. Tell me that you can hear me reasonably well. I'm using a different headset. The microphone is here, so I hope you can hear me okay. Let's see. Mr. Slavguns is supposed to join me in a little bit. Mr. Northwest Guns is not. Reticle discussion is always interesting. Okay. Scorpion Outdoors. Good to see you here, sir. Very clear audio. Excellent. All right. Any particular reticle you want to start with? Earlier, Mr. Rogers, David Rogers, asked for size 656 reticle. I actually did a video on that. I put that in the chat box. But I can pull that up if you want and talk about it briefly. Alex is here from New Zealand. Paul is here. Excellent. Very good. Where was I? Yes. So, what do you want to do? Size 6 reticle or do some precision reticles? Talk a little bit in general. Well, let's do this. Let's spend a couple of minutes on general. If you want to go over a specific reticle, put it in the chat box, and we'll do that. Here are some general guidelines. Reticles for second focal plane rifle scopes are comparatively easy to design because in the grand scheme of things, you should not be doing anything complicated in most second focal plane rifle scopes because the reticles attentions change with magnification because magnification on all the different variable scopes is functionally uncalibrated. It's complicated reticles and second focal plane scopes for the most part is kind of a shit show. So I'm going to focus mostly on front focal plane reticles. In second focal plane reticles, I prefer something fairly simple. Number 4, a different residual plex, simple illuminated dot, stuff like that, with some moderate magnification scopes where the reticle is calibrated just the highest magnification. Some sort of a simple mil-radian reticle is usable, but outside of that, if I'm looking at a complicated reticle, it's going to be the front focal plane scope. And truthfully, for most applications, I do prefer front focal plane scopes anyway. With front focal plane scopes, you have a complication. The reticle on highest magnification is going to... Okay, there is a request for the Leica PRB reticle. I'll discuss it. Leica guys won't like it, but I'll be happy to discuss it. I don't particularly like that reticle. Now, I've used that scope, spent a lot of time with it, and the reticle didn't get in my way too much, but I basically ended up using it as a simple mil hash reticle where I dialed elevation and held for wind and ignored the rest of it, basically. Would like I actually prefer the ballistic. But anyhow, with focal based scopes, there's a complication. With high magnification, everything looks bold and fairly visible usually, and you have all the precision guys have this strong tendency to try to make all the reticle features very thin. And then when you go on lower magnification, if the reticle features are pretty thin, on low magnification, you don't have a reticle. You don't see anything. So finding the right balance, adding some high visibility features for low magnification, making sure it can do what you need to do at middle magnification while not being overly thick on high magnification. There's a little bit of a science, a little bit of an art to it. Okay. KAHLES AMR versus skmr. It's an interesting question. In a modern reticle, with reticles that are simple mil hash reticles, there is usually not that much happening. You basically choose whether you like 0.2 milliradian based design or 0.5 milliradian based design, and the way these are typically used, um, you dial elevation, hold for wind, or dial for both, and that's pretty much it. Now, there are a few different ones that tend to be comparatively thin. Arguably, the best known one is probably MSR and MSR2 by thin accuracy, but Schmidt's P4FL is a reasonable example. Tangent has the JTAC reticle, which is a nice. They're all nice reticles. I like them. I use them. The contention, the disagreements usually start when we start talking about three reticles, and a lot of these general disagreements really come down to, well, honestly, personal preferences and differences of how different people shoot. I tend to use reticle holds if let's have shooting plates, something like that. Within the first, 2-3 milliradian of hold out, I don't know, between 400 and 600 yards, depending on the cartridge, and past that, I tend to dial. But if I have to transition between, let's say, 800 and 900 yard targets, especially if I feel like I want to do it quickly, I'm generally going to try to do this correction with the reticle. Right? I don't dial for everything, but some of the best shooters I know of dial everything. So it's clearly not a bad way to go. It doesn't work all that great for me. I'm sort of clumsy. I'm not very good in putzing with the turrets without losing my shooting position to some degree. So a lot of it comes down to the skill level. Because mine is not terribly high, I tend to use the reticle a good bit. Reading at how people use reticles, you get a whole gamut. Everybody does this a little bit differently. But some combination of reticle holds and dialing is very common, and dialing for wind, well, some very, very good shooters do it. Dialing for wind, while fairly commonly used, seems to be in the minority. Right. With that in mind, when we think of a reticle, we think of a couple of things. We think of a primary aiming point, right? There has to be one primary aiming point, assuming that's the thing that's the part of the reticle you aim with. If you are dialing for both elevation and wind, the primary aiming point has to be functional on all magnifications. The tree portion, the portion used for holdover and reticle wind holds, um, that's where you start getting to some disagreements, because I have had the advantage of having had the opportunity to design a couple of reticles for different manufacturers. And when I design a reticle, I take the input of what they want to achieve with a significant degree. They design the way I like to use them. A good example from that is probably March's FMLTR1. And the way I did this, I made the center a little bit slightly more prominent, so I have reasonable visibility across magnification ranges. I made the tree comparatively thin, so that below about 10, 11 power, the tree essentially disappears, because I don't want to use it on lower I don't want to get in the way on lower magnifications. Okay. Well, we're getting some good questions. Okay. All right, I hope this is all making sense to you. Oh, Mr. Slavgans joined us. I see he just popped on. He's putzing around. It doesn't look like he's ready to be added to the stream. Mr. Slavgans, if you can hear me, put something into the chat box or just nod when you're ready to be joined. Are you ready? No, not yet. He's making some sort of funny hand gestures, but the way the screen looks, there is this big thing that says show on stream that's blocking all his hand gestures. I just know he's waving at me like he's in Italian. But beyond that, I have no clue what he's trying to convey. I don't know what that means. I have read what he's doing. Okay. So let's see. What was the first question we had here? The very beginning, Mr. David Rogers asked about this size 656 reticle. It's a low power reticle. It is a somewhat unusual design. I'm gonna pop that on the screen and we can talk about it for a little bit. And then the next question was about Leica PRB, and I'll find a picture of that and pop that on next. Let's start with the size 6. Okay. Let's see, is it on? No, it's not on. Now it's on. Mr. Slavgans, are you ready to be joined? Yes.
Hello, everybody. I'm sorry I'm late. I had YouTuber problems. So at first I thought that my switch was not working. Turns out it was the cable. Then I plug in the camera that I've been using recently, which is the Panasonic S5 II, which I do everything in 6K. However, it was just the image was just like way, way, way too big. So I had to go get one of my older Sonys and put that on. So I apologize, but I'm really glad to be here.
In other words, first world problems. Okay.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, I'm seeing this like it's not focusing on my face.
It's okay. You're not that pretty. We know what you look like. It's not a problem.
Hey! I even dressed up into like like my stuff. It's like I actually realized. I think this is my first live stream that I'm on where I have real internet, as you people call it, because everyone was making fun of me that we had cellular internet here. But I went back. The cable company gave us a good deal, so I'm like, okay, fine, I will take that.
All right. So. In case you're wondering, you're freezing up as if you were having cellular internet. No real difference that I can see.
My apologies.
That's okay. All right. Anyhow, so I don't know how much of you heard. I'm basically going to start pulling up different reticles that people bring
Absolutely.
up, and we'll just talk about them a little bit and see.
Okay, can I make a comment? Like I'm looking at this, like it just screams Star Wars.
Size 6, yes. It's the X-wing. One of the reasons I like it.
Yes. Stay on target.
Yeah. Okay. So let's do this then. Let's see if it's going to change. Did it change? Yes, it changed. Perfect. Okay. So this reticle is very interesting. The company behind the brand Size 6, Armament Technologies, they came into prominence in optics world originally because of they are the master distributor, the only distributor for all commercial usage of the Alcan scopes. And it so happens that the gentleman who owns it, he's now sort of semi-retired. His name is Andy Weber. He's an interesting guy and a smart guy, and he's a very, very good shooter. And it turns out that the original Alcan reticle that he did for the Canadian military, well, I don't know, he did it, but it was done with his involvement. And the way Canadian military wanted it, they wanted this. Um, it's a nice way of saying this. They wanted this complicated compound BDC. If you look at the holes, so you're supposed to, sight this into a couple hundred meters or 150, whatever. Depending which cartridge you use, the actual sighting is going to change a little bit. There are a couple of ways to play around it. And then you see 300 meters, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Notice that your spacing changes. If you look at it carefully, from 5 to 600, there's a bigger gap than from 6 to 700, right? You see what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
There's no cartridge in the world that does this. And 56 definitely doesn't do it either. What the Canadian military wanted was to use the same basic reticle on their 14.5-inch, what's it called, C7 or whatever, their version of the M4, and on the longer 20-inch barrels machine guns. Well, whatever they passed for a soul over there. And the idea was that with a shorter barreled carbine, you're not going to be shooting past 600 anyway. And the longer holes are only basically for area fire for the machine gun. And that's why you got this composite BDC here. The holes are not consistent. There's a switch point at 600 meters. Okay? So that's the history of this thing. And they did this for historical reasons, and all of the different Alcan reticles and then Psi 656 reticle retain the same holdover drops. The rest of the reticles obviously new and done a little bit differently. What they're calling rapid aiming feature, this 4 little bullets in an X-wing format that screams Star Wars to Mr. Slapguns over here, not incorrectly. It's an interesting solution. So one of the problems with front focal plane reticles is that you go low power and you can't see shit.
Yeah.
The most common way of doing this is to put in a horseshoe or a dot, and that actually works very well. I've designed several reticles like that. A few of them are coming into the market this year, some next year. That works really well. But it also does block a few things, and it does produce. A lot of people don't like the slightly claustrophobic effect of looking through this donut. I actually like it, but I can see that point. So they were looking at it, trying to figure out how can we add something bold to the center of the reticle that will point toward your primary aiming point, define the primary aiming point nicely while not blocking too much stuff. And they came up with this arrangement of 4 bullets basically pointing toward the center. They first tried it on one of the Alcan scopes. There used to be this 3-power ATOS scope. Oh, so just for the record, I'm going to stop for a moment. So Mr. Scorpion Outdoor Products is a good friend. I think he's trying to trigger me because the Plum reticles, for the most part, is kind of stupid. Well, it's not quite so much. It's not entirely stupid, but all the implementations of it I've seen were pretty stupid.
I'm going to play the good co-host here, and I'm sure a lot of people don't know what a Plum reticle is.
I will get to that. Yeah. So I'm just trying to point out that.
So before you go down that, before you go down that rabbit hole, make sure everyone's on the same page.
What makes you think that I will do any of that?
Because I know you.
Okay. So I'm not going to do any of that. Okay.
And after you talk about Plum reticles, can you talk about Night Force optics? I
like Night Force optics.
Oh, okay.
You would think you're bringing up IOR. That's different.
Well, that's a whole different story.
Correct. Yeah. But that's a whole story. But anyhow, so these 4 bullet-like thingies where the idea was to give you some sort of a high visibility feature because everything else, when you go to 1 power, becomes somewhat thin. And the idea is that whether your battery dies or it doesn't, you have this nice thick edge reticle, and this X-wing structure does give you a reasonable aiming point on 1 power. It's not the fastest thing I've ever seen on 1 power. It's not like a nuclear bright dot, but it does work. I'm a little slower with it than something like a Razor Gen 3 with a diffractive reticle. It's perfectly usable. The big advantage of this approach, though, one of the things they wisely chose not to do, they did not illuminate these bullet-like structures, because when you have something that thick, that close to the center, if you illuminate it, it's extremely distracting in low light. So what's going to happen is that when you're on some intermediate magnification and low light, you turn on illumination, unless it's ultra dim, these things are going to overpower everything.
Oh, yeah.
With traditional reflective reticle designs, how bright something looks is a function of its area, because that's the reflective area. And making these things illuminated for this stage would have been a mistake. What they did in the earlier LCAM 3-power scope, in the ATOS, they illuminated just the bullet tips. And that was okay, but that was still distracting. What happens is that the modern low-power variable doctrine really involves being quite good on 1 power and having an offset red dot. Because the red dot is still faster, and it gives an auxiliary sight. It's a little extra reliability, a little bit redundancy. It's not a bad idea. So what SciSix guys wisely chose to do, they made this reticle okay on 1 power. It's excellent on all other magnifications. And with or without a battery, you have something viable to use in all magnifications. It's truly a jack of all trades thing. Another thing they did very intelligently, if you look at the wind holes in the primary stadia, well, the hash marks are just 1 milliradian spaced. And in the tree, all the dots are also 1 milliradian spaced.
But they're on the halves, aren't they?
Pardon me?
But those dots look like they're on the halves.
No, they are. Each one is. Wind holes are 1 milliradian each. They're not half. They're one.
It just
the one that's closest to the vertical. If you look at it, you see there is a little gap where the line starts. It's 1 milliradian from.
Oh, that's what it is. Yeah, that was tricky. Yep.
Yeah, the horizontal hash marks range kind of at longer distances than an 18-inch human chest. The spacing between the high visibility, this bullet-looking thing is also about 18 inches at what's it, 50 yards or 100 yards? I don't remember. I think it's 100. So you have some rough distance estimation basically on the human torso. Yeah. But they decided not to putz around and try to figure out what different wind holes are, because they will be different for different barrel lengths, for different bullets, different everything. And what you can do for your gun, it's very easy to figure out what 1 milliradian means and kind of figure out your wind holes. But another really important thing that nobody really talks about, and it's generally one of the big weaknesses of BDC wind hole designs, is that when you're shooting fairly far away with a 1 to 6 power scope, it's nice to, figure out the wind and hit your target in the first shot. But really what you want to have a really good ability to figure out where you missed and follow up quickly with another shot and have the right holes to do that. And the way our brain does this, if you see your miss and it's between the two dots, your brain immediately figures out where the center is, etc., right? If you have these equidistant dots, you can very clearly see and memorize by how much your hole needs to be corrected. If these dots are not equidistant, meaning they are designed, they're all spaced differently depending on the distance and wind and all sorts of stuff, you get lost in it very quickly, and figuring out a correction quickly is very tricky. It's trainable, with practice, anything can be done, but it's somewhat natural for us. It's somewhat not natural for us. Looking at these equidistant dots, meaning the same spacing between them, really helps quickly figure out second shot correction. Okay? Is all this making sense? Yes, no, maybe?
It's interesting.
Okay. So it's if I'm getting too much into the weeds, tell me. I'm a nerdy guy. I like nerdy things, so I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And I work with vision systems for a living. It doesn't hurt. Okay. All right. Any more questions about the size 6 reticle, or should I move on? While people are thinking, have you used it? Have you used size 6?
I've looked for not the LVPOs, but I have looked through and used a couple of Spectres.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was actually one of the earlier ones,
Yeah.
the ones with the donuts rather than like the pointy things.
Yeah. Okay.
But it was pretty quick. I will say that. I didn't have it was I don't remember anything negative about it or about the
Yeah.
experience
Those
besides the weight.
yeah, yeah, it was not a lightweight optic. Yeah, that one didn't have the wind holes, but it would have the same BDC drops,
Yeah.
and that generally in the ballpark. I mean,
I will say, like, we can joke around having like the X wing on there, but it's quick. It's like when you just put it on there, I can definitely see
yeah,
how it would be usable, and it's kind of like what was interesting. So immediately before this, I mean, I just picked up um the thing that just got released a couple of
uh,
days
the
ago,
4025, yeah.
the 4 to 25,
Hmm.
and so like it's actually the first time I had the chance to like really play with it. And so number one, like I didn't notice they had like 30 mils of holdovers within the scope, but like
Mm,
most of them aren't usable past like 20.
exactly.
But it's like it's great at like up to 20 magnification, but as soon as you turn the magnification down to 4, it's like it's all useless. It's like you
Hmm.
can't see anything. It's like it's probably like one of the only things that really kind of bugs me about this one. But I think most of the people who would be using these type of scopes, and I guess really the type of shooting that I do, you're generally going to have it cranked up between 6 to 18 to like 20 power,
Hmm.
where it does become useful. But I could definitely see, I mean, like one of the biggest challenges, I'm sure your audience, my audience, I mean, the new hotness is LVPOs, the 1 to 8s, 1 to 10s.
Okay,
Um,
you're gonna kill me. It's LPVOs. Like you're triggering my OCD.
oh,
Comrade,
LPVOs. There
low
you go.
power variable optic, man.
So
Have you seen?
I
Have you
understand that
seen?
I'm not
Have
gonna
you?
make fun of it because like people trigger me by calling it Hornet Day, and
No, you're not triggering me. I just watched a video on Instagram where there is these new age American communists are having a meeting. I'll find the link. I'll put it somewhere. It's incredible. I thought it was a parody. Apparently, it's not. Like they're all
I'll,
triggering each other's OCDs. They're
okay,
all consider themselves disabled. They're all calling each other comrade. It was the most hilarious thing ever.
nice.
Yeah.
But so since everybody's playing with low power variable optics, I mean, it's definitely I think like reticle design, I mean, like it's far more critical on those type of scopes where it is really meant to be used at both ends of the magnification rather than your typical either hunting scope or your precision rifle scope or PRS scope, where you're generally going to be within a range and you're generally never going to be cracked up all the way to the highest magnification, and you're typically not going to be at the low end anyway, so you can kind of make the reticle work. But with a low power variable optic, I mean, that reticle design better be useful at
Across the board.
across the board, and especially now that you have, I mean, it's no longer 1 to 4x or 1 to 6x. Now it's all 1/8, 1/10s. It's like it's even that much more critical, and like I almost like I don't envy the job of scope and reticle designers where you're almost kind of like between the hard rock and a hard place between, do we make it usable at the higher magnification and useless at the low end, or useless at the low, or useful at the low end, and at the high end it's going to be like way too much, you're going to be missing most of it.
Oh,
So it's interesting. I mean, like the whole X is there. On the wide end, I can definitely see it being pretty quick, especially for somebody, whether you're hunting your 2-legged creatures or 4-legged creatures.
I've shot a hog with that scope with a thermal clip on, and even with the thermal, that X structure was really nice. It didn't block out too much, but I was able to nicely bracket the pig within the thermal scope, and it just gives you a little bit more hold stability. There's another factor that I'll address something you said I disagree with in a moment.
Okay.
Um, uh, I always disagree with something. It's a genetic flaw. You know, like when you have two Jews in the room, it's at least six different opinions, right? So,
Oh, absolutely. It's like, and you know,
yeah,
it's like the other person might be saying something you 100% agree with on most occasions,
and
but
I'll still argue.
you still have to argue it.
I'll drink to that. But There is an interesting thing that I need to explore a little bit. The way we aim is interesting in that we start subconsciously making micro corrections that
Mhm.
always make us shoot worse. Okay, because you generally don't want that. You want to aim, relax, get your breathing control, and squeeze it off. If you start trying to line up the reticle perfectly, you will generally shoot worse.
Yeah.
Okay? There seems to be some sort of a relationship between the reticle shape and the subconscious need to do micro corrections. Something I need to explore a little bit. I don't have a good answer
Hmm.
to that yet.
Actually, that's really interesting because like there's like some. I'm sure we're probably going to get into it, but like so like reticles for your typical precision rifle type
Mm-hmm.
scopes. There's definitely some where it's like I'm just like more or less happy just to get an acceptable reticle movement
Mm-hmm.
and just pull the trigger. And
Which
then
is
there's
what you want.
others, and then there's other scopes where I'm like literally like I'm waiting for the planets to align to get the perfect shot, and it's like, yeah, you're gonna kill the group sometimes anyway as a result of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but
Correct.
it's actually it's interesting. It
Trying to
is.
time your shot within your wobble zone will usually
Oh yeah,
make you shoot worse. Olympic shooters have known this for a long time. A buddy of mine is a former, he was a head coach of the Russian Olympic team for the London Olympics. He was a world champion, like
yeah.
a pistol shooter in the 70s. And all the guy, he's Olympic shooters have figured all of this out a long time ago. They just don't tell anyone, bastards.
Yeah.
Uh, One other quick thing, and this is sort of an ideological thing. Even for high magnification scopes, if the scope goes from 4 to 25, it better be fucking useful at 4 and 25 and
Yeah.
everywhere in between. I absolutely object to the notion as well. It's not that important for that kind of scope. No,
No, for
if
that
you're
type
not
of
going to
scope,
use
it
it on
is.
4 power, don't make it a 4 power. Make it a 6 to 25. It's going to be better optimized.
Yes. So I will say, and I'm not sure if you were planning on addressing this at all or not, but I would definitely love your opinion on this because I know it's something we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about the struggles of reticle design, so having that on one side of the equation, and then going back to SHOT Show this year, the biggest thing we've seen with scopes is you have digital reticles being put in.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that that is going to be a solution for having possibly multiple reticles for whether you're shooting on low power or high magnification?
That's one of the solutions. The scope you're talking about is the 7 power Hyper 7 from Element.
Right. Yeah. So there's the Hyper 7, and I'm also even thinking about like your remember there was an Israeli company that did that digital
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
red dot type thing, and then
Mm-hmm.
just even like the night vision scopes, like where you
Yeah,
can have like a choice of radicals.
yeah. So that's part of the solution, but that's not the whole thing. So the best solution ultimately is not available for civilians yet, although Hyper 7 gets us a step in the direction. The best solution is the active reticle that Vortex has in XM157, where you have a perfectly standard edged reticle, that's a nice mirrored style reticle, and then there is also an electronic reticle projected and overlaid on it, and that one can adjust, give you a realistic solution, adjust for wind, elevation, temperature, etc. And you can also have it produce something bolder on low power and all sort of stuff. So the right solution, the most correct solution long term, is probably the combination of a non-battery powered reticle with a battery powered reticle that is adaptive. How soon that's gonna make it down to civilians is anybody's guess, but it will. And more than one company is working on it. I know of at least two viable technologies that will get us there. And if I know of two, that means there's a couple more that I'm not aware of. Like I don't
Now,
talk to everyone I talk
are
about.
there any government prohibitions from having that type of technology in the civilian world, or is it rather than Vortex was the first to it and we're keeping it primarily on the military side?
Okay, so I need to be very careful here because there's some NDAs in place. There are government restrictions, but I don't think they are significant. They're not on everything, basically. We can get this technology in the civilian
Okay.
market. It's just a little bit expensive. The things
Okay.
that the government is restricting, and there's talk of a couple other things getting restricted, probably not going to get in the way for the civilian world.
But then again, I mean, on the flip side of it, I mean, we already had the rifles that literally you just point at the target and it calculates everything, and then it just pulls the trigger. So it's like, we're basically there. And then at SHOT Show, I mean, you do have those miniguns mounted, and then you just control it with an iPad.
Yeah, well, I mean, that has been around for a long time.
Yeah,
Look, I mean, just because something exists has never prevented the government from doing something stupid with it, okay?
that is true.
Right?
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna go switch the autofocus switch because I think it's
Okay.
bothering me. So I'll be.
Yeah. So the next reticle that was brought up, I believe, is the Leica PRB reticle. So I'm gonna go and put that on the screen, and we'll talk about that while Mr. Slapguns is putzing around with his autofocus switch. Let's see, where is that? I just found it. Leica. Oh, this is in the content. There we go. See if you guys can see it well. Okay. So this is the Leica PRB reticle. Guys, can you see it well enough, or do I need to try to make it bigger? Okay, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that you can see it well enough. So there are a few. So the core of it is okay, right? So I'm not a huge fan of aiming with the. Oh, they should make it bigger, right? Should make it bigger. Yeah. I think you guys should be able to see my mouse. So I'm not a huge fan of aiming with this little circle in the center, but it works. Some people like it, some don't like it. It is a personal preference.
All right.
The primary stadia lines are
Yeah.
done reasonably. Okay, so we'll look at the PRB reticle from like electrical. In general, I didn't like. So here, so far, I'm talking about the things I did like. Okay? So the primary stadia, the ones that are shown in a little bit red, are done reasonably well. In that we have standard 0.2 marks, the holes at 0.4 and 0.6 are a little bit bigger. They cross the primary line. The holes at 0.2 and 0.8 are a little bit smaller. When you go to low power, those little short hashes disappear from view, and you have these two in the center, and they together start merging and kind of leave you with some sort of a mark at 0.5 mil. As you go to low power, you don't need 0.2s anyway. That's fairly reasonable. On the vertical, I don't like this approach too much because I like horizontal symmetry, and so does our visual system. So when you have these short hashes that only on the right side, it makes the whole reticle a little bit skewed.
There's like little X's in there.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to that in a moment. um, it's and then we get so as you go down, there is a number every 2 milliradian. That's fine. The number is only on one side, so now we have a horizontal asymmetry again. Remember, the way human eye works, we like to see when we aim, we like to see things horizontally somewhat symmetric. Vertical doesn't matter. We'll just look at the horizon, sky above the horizon, earth below the horizon. That looks different. That's fine. Horizontally, the way we aim, we kind of like horizontal symmetry. And here it's kind of screwed up left, right, and sideways. Then the tree is based on 0.5 milliradian holes, while the primary stadia are based on a 0.2 milliradian holes. Why you need to be switching to a completely different way of holding if you are dialing for elevation or holding with the reticle is entirely unclear to me. And then when you look on the tree, every mark is different. So you have small crosses, you have diagonal X's, you have dots, and you have vertical hash marks.
It's like it reminds me like I'm in elementary school and I'm looking
Yeah.
at like one of those like math tables. It's like 2 divided by blank equals X.
Yeah, to me, that was just odd. So I need to, rather than uh, aim with the same type of a structure most of the time, I have to sometimes aim with a normal cross, sometimes with an X, sometimes with a dot, sometimes with a vertical hash mark. And on top of it, if you are trying to divide between them, now you're not going to be dividing properly, because if you look at the space between the hash mark and the cross and you're trying to find the middle of it, it's going to be one spot. And then if you look at the space between the vertical hash mark and then X, and your eye is trying to zero in on the middle of it, it's going to be a different spot, right?
Now, is there a premise or is there like a purpose behind having different
So that
marks?
generally, so I haven't talked to Cal Zant from Precision Rifle Block Design. That's why it's called the PRB
Okay.
reticle. Cal is a nice guy. I haven't talked to him in a long time. So I always feel bad when I criticize the reticle, because Cal is a nice guy. But usually you use different aiming points to quickly figure out what is a half mil hold and what
Okay.
is a full mil hold, etc. But in this case, you have a full mil holds is either an X or a cross, and half mil hold is either dot or a vertical hash mark. And if you go out to the edge, a full mil hold is a number. That actually, like, I like to integrate the numbers into the grid, into the tree.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of keeps on. But here they're also pretty small. They're bigger by the primary lines, which is good, but they are sort of asymmetric. I personally, where you see, by the vertical line, you see the 2 and the 4,
Yeah.
and are fairly large and prominent. They are at approximately zero point 0.4 milliradian hold, and they just block your entire hold. So I like to have numbers on the outside, and he does that here, but I like them to be a little bit more prominent so I can easily quickly refer to them and see.
So here's kind of like the other, I mean, to play devil's advocate a
Of
little bit
course.
here. So I kind of like when I see this and you start kind of going into the explanation, and one of the reasons was asked, well, is there supposed to be a purpose behind it? So one of the gentlemen we kind of respect, David Tubbs, he has his reticle that he
Yes.
designed for like long range shooting.
The
Now,
DTR, yes.
if you hand that to somebody who's purchasing the first precision rifle, they're gonna be like, "What the heck is this?" And it's like, "Why is this as it is?" So I'm kind of and like so it's meant for a specific audience. Is this possibly the same thing with this reticle in the scope,
No,
or
because it's just a milli-radian reticle.
okay,
David's is the only BTC reticle that truly works
yeah,
in precision scopes. I had David come on my show. We did the whole DTR explanation.
yep,
DTR reticle is different, but I've been talking about it with David well before he released it. If you use his system, it absolutely works. But there is a learning curve.
yeah,
And we can talk about DTR. I was hoping not talk about it too much because
you
I
don't
don't
have to,
use it all the time.
yeah,
So I don't like, I need to, every time I need to dig through the manual, use it.
yeah,
I once spent a month with it and I was totally fine with it. But
yeah.
because I don't use it all the time, I need to think about it again.
So it's kind of like the same thing. I mean, like I think like people who are kind of getting into the game and I guess buying their first real scope,
Mhm.
it's like they're gonna look at, okay, well, what is the military use? Or like if you look at the Horus reticles, if you look at the Tremor reticles, and it's like they just go down like this path, like, well, the more stuff on there and the more unique stuff, that means it must be better because I'm just too stupid to understand
So
it
yeah,
yet.
so let's zoom out a little bit of this reticle and see what else is in this guy. Okay, where is it? He had there.
Whoa.
That's a zoomed out version.
Whoa.
What happened? Something weird? Does it look weird? I'm trying to.
um do you have dark mode on possibly? Because I think that's actually it might
No, I'm
be.
not in the dark mode. The Leica website is doing something weird. I'm gonna fix it. Give me 1 second.
And hey, my
So
autofocus works.
let's do stop sharing. There we go. No, no.
And I will say, since I've known you, I've become much more of a reticle pretentious snob.
Yeah, I have that effect on people. Okay, like a website has gone completely nuts on me. Let me see if I can find a better picture. Well, you know what? I'll just blow this one up and I'll show you. I just want to show you the zoomed out version of this reticle. No, that doesn't work. I tested that scope, so I should have something on it. Just Max, distract them while I'm looking for it.
Okay, so I'll kind of go for some of the comments. Michael had a question, who do you design reticles for? I'm sure you'll address that in a bit. There was a question earlier when we were speaking about it. I'm not sure if you had experience with them. I know I have a couple of them. So M. Gabriel was asking about the SIG reticles. I'm assuming you're talking about the SIG digital second focal plane reticles found in the Sierra 3 and Sierra 6. Correct me if I'm wrong on those, or are you actually asking about the ones in the Tango 6, Tango 3, and so forth? Smart Shot, I think that was actually the one we were talking about.
Yeah, that was the Smart Shot was the Israeli company. I'm trying to find some sort of a downloadable thing on the PRB reticle that shows the whole thing. And like a website is really not cooperating. And I have some pictures of it, but they're not terribly good. That's not what I'm looking for.
Okay,
okay, I found something Europtic. Okay, that's not that's 15 power. I want to show you what it looks like in low power. Oh, there we go, found it. That's okay. I am going to share this screen, and if you, how about I'm going to share it, and you can then explain to me how this makes sense. Check this out. So this is that reticle on 5 power.
We don't see it. There we go.
Okay.
To me, this screams like tremor light.
Pretty much. Look, so you have your primary stadia, which are kind of visible.
Okay.
You have this grid that goes all the way to the edges of the field of view.
So,
Why?
I'm looking at this. I'm grabbing my fountain pen because it looks like I'm about to write in my dotted journal. So I love writing in like dotted notebooks, and like that's what it screams like.
So, and then I think 10 milliradian, there are these horizontal lines that start off way to the side and go to the edge of the field of view. What the fuck are they here for?
I would love to know the premise or kind of like the reasoning behind it. I mean, it's like
I could never quite figure out the rest of it. Ideally, they're supposed to give you a quick reference of where 10 milliradian are, right?
Yeah.
So the reticle gives you on 5 power holds of more than 30 milliradian. How often have you had to hold with the reticle for 30 milliradian? And can you actually hold with a grid that goes like this?
So that's basically kind of the same thing. So like with the Toric 4 to 25, like one of the things I noticed in there is like, I'm like, oh wow, there's actually like 30. Like, I mean, I'm the type of person, I mean, I'll like out to 1,200, 1,300 yards, I'll just generally hold over anyway. So, I mean, I've had to hold over 15 mils at times. And it's like, it's nice. Like, I can't stand it like when scopes are just like 10. And that's one of the big reasons why I really like the Burris SCR2 reticle, because that actually has a good amount of 20 mils of holdovers. And like I saw this one, like, wow, there's like 30, but I'm like, in order for me to actually see all the way in the bottom, you got to be completely zoomed out. And at that point, it's basically pointless because you're not either, you can't see the target and you can't make out the differences between them. It's like, I'm like, my vision is not horrible, but like, it's still decent, but I can't see, like, I can't, like, on 4 power or 5 power, I can't see it.
Pointless is half the problem. It's actually actively harmful.
Okay.
One of the things that happens with all of the variable scopes is that when you are on the lowest magnification, you have very large exit pupil, much larger than your eye pupil. And if you move at all behind the eyepiece, there is a little bit of a distortion that changes depending on your eye position. In good rifle scopes, all that that distortion is primarily contained to the outer edges of the field of view. You normally don't notice it too much because if you look at any of a normal scene, desert, hills, rocks, green vegetation, it's all kind of a mash anyway. So if it's a little bit distorted, it doesn't matter. But if you're putting straight reticle lines in there and they're wavy in front of you, guess where your eye wanders? There is some weird shit moving at the edges of my field of view. So instead of focusing on the primary aiming point, your brain is frantically trying to figure out what is that crap that's moving. Remember,
Yeah.
so you have to think about how human vision evolved. We see really, really well in the center
Yeah.
of our field of view. That's what we aim with. As you go out into the periphery, the concentration of light sensitive cells in your retina goes down, but they're incredibly sensitive. Your visual system is designed to be always aware of what's out there. And if something is moving, you turn and look at it because it might be some large, unpleasant animal coming over to kick your ass or eat it whole without skinning first. Uh, this is, and when you're fresh, it's okay. When you are tired, this becomes a complete shit show. It's chorus reticles have the same problem. So much
Yeah.
crap in there that when you're tired, it becomes increasingly harder to use. Now, once again, is it useless? No, you can work all around this. I've used this reticle. I worked fine. I just ignored the tree and the grid and all these crazy lines and used it as a mil hash reticle. Worked great. Okay, right. So, and what other thing I'm going to add to this is that if you look at it in the center, it goes, I think, about 1 milliradian above center.
Yeah.
So I did that in a couple of designs, and over time, what I started doing is I started adding about 5 milliradian, 4 or 5 milliradian post above center. And the basic reason for it is that if you have good recoil control and if you're trying to see trace when you're looking
Mm-hmm.
at shooting longer distances, it's usually going to be in about 4 to 6 milliradian range above the line of sight, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little bit less. We are not very good in estimating in just aiming with empty space. So that gives you a very quick visual reference where to be looking for trace to see if you miss. Because if you are not shooting in the desert, if you're in a place where you don't see splash, seeing trace is basically your best chance of
Nice.
figuring out where the bullets go. All right, so there were two people, Rob and Kevin Wood, who asked me about PRB reticle. Before I switch over, do you guys have anything? Is this all making sense? Let's see if they had anything else to say. Okay. All right. They did
So
not
here's
say
a
anything.
question.
Mm-hmm.
Considering that you consult with a lot of these companies,
Mm-hmm.
what's the thought process or as to why these reticles get approved and put into scopes in the first place? Are these people just basically marketing morons and they think it's going to be cool, or they just need something a little bit different, or are they actually thinking that there's a practical purpose to this?
It really runs the gamut. Some people have, like me, have very specific preferences and just agrees with theirs. Something most probably thinks it looks cool and it's gonna sell because Horus reticles sell because
Yeah.
they look cool and nobody really uses them the way the original designer intended to. Everybody who uses Horus reticles will just uses them as mil grid reticles and ignores all the bullshit. Uh, the sad truth of it is I have a suspicion that most people who pay money for scopes with sophisticated reticles
Mm-hmm.
never always shoot from the bench at 100 yards and never really do anything with these fancy scopes. And they
I
buy
think
them
that
because they look cool.
I think that's most gun owners to be in. I think in general, what was it?
Very
As
possible.
per NSSF, what was it, like 95% of gun owners are never going to shoot past 100 yards in the first place. So, but
Well, but
but we like to have the flexibility to do it.
once we start talking about precision scopes, I was
Yeah.
hoping that it's a somewhat more involved audience.
Okay.
But uh, marketers will make stuff that they think will sell,
Okay. So
right?
okay. So, and that's a perfect segue. And I know you respect this company a lot, so don't take it as an insult. But what about the reticles in the primary arms scopes? Because they'll have the fancy range finding features. They're fairly busy
Yeah.
reticles.
So I actually, I just did a video live stream on my locals website, but that one was behind the paywall, where I took apart the reticle in the GLX, the BPR mill. I think I've seen the BPR mill or
Yeah,
something
the
like that.
BP Mill Athena. Yeah,
I don't think it's a good design,
yeah.
and I can verbalize and I can go over it if you'd like. I have one, spent time with it. I like primary arms; they're good people. I genuinely like ACSS reticles, but I will say that ACSS reticles work much better. So Dimitri is a good dude and a good friend, the guy who designs them for primary arms. He's a smart guy and he's a shooter. I think his designs work much better in low power variables and prismatics. And most reticles I've seen from him for precision scopes, I think have issues.
Okay.
Some more serious than others. The BPR mill, I think, is not a good design. Once again, in good light, when I'm on high magnification and I don't use most of it, it works great.
Yeah.
The
Or do you think
moment
that?
the light goes down, you start having issues. I can take it apart if you want. We can
Or
load
something.
it up.
But here's the thing, though. So I mean, like, do you honestly think that like they know that, but like they feel like they need to include something different in order to differentiate their product versus, let's say, a Vortex? So I mean, let's put it this way. I mean, like, it's one thing if you're like a Zeiss or a KAHLES or a ZCO or whoever, where you have your core niche audience that's going to buy your product. But let's say you're a mass market brand, so you're an Athlon or a Bushnell or like Primary Arms coming out from a different field, where it's like do you think they would be as success? So not even looking or judging the reticle itself, but the scopes. I mean, they seem to provide very decent quality. They're selling in good amounts. They provide a good amount of value. But do you feel like a part of that is due to the fact that the reticle is almost completely different than what you get from Athlon or Vortex?
So I think for primary arms, the ACSS reticle is a huge deal.
Yeah.
I sort of try to keep track when I criticize something, what I get the most flack for, right? Who has the most loyal fanboys?
Okay.
By far, and it's not close, by far the most loyal fanboys are Night Force optics and
Yep.
ACSS reticles.
Okay.
Every time I talk crap about any ACSS reticle, somebody in the comments somewhere explains not so politely that I'm not qualified to be in the same zip code with an ACSS reticle, much less discuss it, right?
Because you're not a tactical operator, don't you know that?
Apparently, yeah. Look, ACSS reticles generally work, especially the low power LPBO ones.
Yeah.
I think Dimitri gets a little bit too carried away with ranging features. You don't need 16 of them, my personal opinion. I think
Yeah.
a little more simplicity would be good. And some reticles they get in the way, others they don't. I have a video coming up on the PLXC talking about the meters and the milliradian versions with that exact argument and detailed explanation. But they generally work. However, they really appeal to mole ninjas.
Yeah.
Like mole ninjas love ACSS reticles, chorus reticles, and from a standpoint of primary arms, they can make a reticle that generally works, and they can collect some money from, well, basically internet commandos. Why not?
Perfect. So then
I
a lot of
remember I'm not in that position. I don't sell scopes. It's easy for me
yeah.
to say, right?
All right. So we're gonna answer a comment and a question we're gonna have. So now that you basically crap on a lot of these LVPO, um,
LPVO.
LPVO, I will put a little post-it on my screen. I promise. I am dyslexic on that one. So now that we've crapped on a lot of low power variable optic reticles, somebody had a question. What reticles have you designed, and have you designed any reticles that can be currently found that you can discuss um, in LPVOs?
So um, I've had input into LPVO's reticles that I was asked not to talk about it. I have an LPVO style reticle, but it's in a fixed power 5x prismatic coming from Element Optics. It was designed to be also usable in LPVO type design.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's almost on the market. There will be a few others. I did an LPVO reticle for Miopta, but that one was a failure because we had a miscommunication. I thought it would have bright illumination, and the illumination was not bright. So I had to, when you don't have bright illumination, you need to design these things differently. Okay. The reticles that people will know from me that are okay to discuss are Meoptra 3 reticles and Optica 6, and a few March reticles. There are a few others here and there, and there are quite a few where I didn't design the reticle, but I've consulted, so they cleaned a couple of things up.
Yeah.
For example, Swarm Fox's Reese reticle was done with my input, right? Tangent's Gen 3 XR had some input from me. There have been a few others, but it's their design, right? That's for my opinion. I make some suggestions. Sometimes they use them, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they use some of them, etc. All right, let's see. Looking back at the comments, next one was KAHLES AMR and skmr. Let me see if I can find the reticle picture. AMR was the grid type reticle. Okay. Yeah, I had the March scope of the similar reticle. Let me pull that up, and I'm gonna find the skmr, and we'll talk about that as well. So generally, KAHLES reticles are not my favorite designs, but far from being my least favorite. I think they're generally done well. There are certain things about them that I'm not crazy about, but they are perfectly functional reticles, and in my opinion, they don't do anything particularly stupid. I'm looking for a skmr. Give me a moment. KAHLES website is not conducive toward finding anything.
So while you work on that one, think about this one. If whenever you can integrate it, because it's actually an interesting question. So within the scope industry, I mean, you'll have some brands that are only going to produce 2 or 3 scopes, 2 or 3 reticles per scope. Let's say a clean and a dirty version of MRAD or MOA, and then you have scopes. Let's say, for example, like the Leupold Mark V, that they're going to be, or like the Athlons, they're available in like 20 different reticle options.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything from the economics perspective that basically makes them justify to do a limited run of a particular? Are you really? I mean, how thin are you slicing the market when you're doing Tremors and Forest reticles and your own reticles and David Tubb reticles and a bunch of others that they're going to have?
It depends on the profit margin. So every new reticle is adds some cost. You have to make the design. On one hand, on the other hand, it's much cheaper than designing a new scope.
Okay.
So it really depends. It really depends on the demand, and it depends on what your market is.
Yeah. So I'm just even thinking like, so some of the like even like, for example, like the Element guys,
Mhm.
when they first came out with the original ones, they had 4 or even like I think like 6 different reticle options, and then all the new scopes now it's like just MRAD or MOA and that's it, or it's like, or they might even have just like one option and that's it,
No,
and like and like
they're usually four options. They usually have in precision scopes. They usually have four options: milliradian with a tree, milliradian without a tree, MOA with a tree,
oh sorry. No, you're
MOA
right.
without a
Element,
tree.
yeah. There's another optics company that we are discussing, but basically we said like, yeah, we're just getting away with it. And like when we're launching it, it's just going to be a tree. It's going to be a dirty reticle, and your only choice is millirad or MOA, and that's basically it because it's
Oh,
like,
well, Vortex did that, right? So they used to
okay,
have more reticles. Now, if you
okay,
look at the Gen 3, it's just a three reticle, same basic design with MRAD and MOA. Look, they look at the market and they figure out what sells,
yeah,
right? It's for, if the ratio of tree type reticles versus non-tree type reticles is 10 to 1, you sell, you continue making the one that has,
yeah.
that makes 10, right? Okay, so let's do KAHLES. Where is that thing? Okay, that's the AMR, and let me get that to the screen. skmr. Which the fuck reticle is this? This AMR? No. No. Did I just lose it? Gotta be kidding me. Oh, there we go. Whew. Almost had a heart attack.
Here's a comment. Everything you said makes a lot of sense. Now I like the Leica ballistic reticle more.
The L ballistic and the Leica is great. So if I were buying a Leica PRS scope, I would do it with the L ballistic. I didn't like the PRB. I asked them to load me the L ballistic. I spent a few months with it. Perfectly reasonable reticle, dial elevation, hold for wind, unobtrusive, works at all magnifications. Nice reticle.
I bought the Kronos because I love the APLR5 reticle. Very simple and clean and easy to use.
Yeah, it's a
Thoughts?
nice reticle. It's a nice
Yeah.
reticle. Okay, so here's the KAHLES AMR. Tell me if you guys can see it large enough. Is it
You should
visible?
probably zoom in a little bit more if you can.
Let me see if I can. Is it getting bigger?
Yes.
Okay. Can you see my mouse?
Yes.
Okay. So this is an interesting reticle. It was done, if I remember the history of it correctly, it was done at the request of some European special forces teams that they wanted something along these lines. So it was done in a conjunction with them. And this reticle, it's not for everyone. To me, it's pretty usable and it works generally fairly well. There are some flaws. If you want to see a good, truly well designed grid type, so this is a grid type reticle, a little different from a tree type reticle. The skmr3 is a tree type reticle. We can look at that next. As far as grid reticles go, the best one is probably Schmidt and Bender's GR2ID. They're grid reticle. I really like that design. This one is not bad at all. So you basically have a milliradian reticle. You have 0.2 spacing horizontally and vertically in the grid. The lines are not super thick. The primary stadia are a little bit thicker, so you will see them fairly well when you go down in power. The most controversial thing was the way they treated the center. And you see on the bottom right, you see this thing blown up. Rather than having solid lines, they made it look like these little crosses with ever increasing vertical hashes, so it would be
Mm-hmm.
easy to tell which is which, and they are 0.2 milliradian spaced. And the cross in the very center is, for some unclear reason, is actually hollow because you can't
See,
really
I
see it.
I personally like hollow.
Yeah, you don't understand how small this thing is. You don't know if it's
Yeah.
hollow or not. So,
Yeah, you're right.
okay. It's like what 0.04 hole in there.
Now, at what magnification is this on maximum magnification that you're showing the reticle, or what?
It's whatever colors was showing. This is probably on about 20 power, 24
Okay.
powers. Like that. Okay. Not probably not 24, maybe 20.
Yeah,
Wait
so
a
you
second.
definitely
No,
wouldn't be
this
able.
is about 20 power.
Okay, yeah, see
So
it.
basic rule of thumb: it's centered reticle. You see 10 milliradian here. Most high quality modern scopes, their field of view on 20 power is in the 19 to 22 milliradian range.
Okay.
So this one is about 21 or so milliradian, so it's somewhere in the ballpark of 20 power.
Okay.
Okay. So the center structure has been somewhat controversial. And the way they did it, they wanted to leave a lot of empty space around. Interestingly, the primary arms reticle I don't like also has the somewhat similar structure, just this little floating dots, hashes. Here it's crosses in the center. But the way primary arms did it, don't like. This one is not too bad because they only illuminated this center structure. They only illuminated this thing.
Hmm.
And what it does, it allows it to stand out when you need it to. And when you go low power, it kind of becomes like a almost solid cross. And when you
Mm-hmm.
illuminate it, it's nicely steady. It stands out fairly nicely. Okay. Now, what I don't like about this reticle is that, this is, I only found the zoomed in picture. If you zoom out, it goes very far out. It's a very large grid. It goes all the way out, like diagonally, like you see it. And
Hmm.
I think it goes all the way to the edge. And everything below about, 15 or so milliradian is exercised in uselessness for the most part. But if I remember correctly, they were asked, like it was in conjunction with a specific customer, and they wanted it that way. So um, I don't think it was a super successful reticle for KAHLES. I think that's a shame. It's a fundamentally solid design. I think the center structure with all these little crosses, I think that was the primary turnoff. The rest of it is a compared to a conventional grid reticle, and it generally works well. Now, for the way I shoot, this is actually not an ideal reticle. It's one of the reasons, for example, why the reticles in the Z-comp scopes are not ideal for me. They're very nice reticles. They're just not great for the way I shoot. And it is, if you look at it, so there is the center structure. There's lots of space around it, which is good. You can see the splash, etc. But doing corrections near the center is not always so easy. And the grid starts way further down. Once you get into the grid, if you're using the grid to aim fairly far out, you have lots of means. There's enough open space, and then you have lots of means to do corrections. But doing quick reticle corrections around the center is not ideal because you don't have anything else out here to bracket where the shots are.
So here's a question. I've never shot with a grid style reticle, but I mean, so is the purpose supposed to be that you're working along the grid lines? Because I mean, in my mind, it almost seems like you'd want to put something inside the empty boxes rather than along the grid.
Yeah, we should probably talk about the Schmidt reticle after we're done with KAHLES, yes. So that generally is not a bad idea, but you have to keep in mind, if you see an impact that you missed somewhere inside the grid, you because everything is symmetric, your eye will have a pretty good idea where it was, and you can figure out how to correct the hole.
Okay.
It's not. It takes a little practice, but it's doable.
Okay.
The downside of the grid is because you have vertical and horizontal lines because they all look the same, and if you look at it in the middle of it, like where my mouse is, there are no identifying marks. You start counting milliradian, it's comparatively easy to get lost. They do a good job of identifying where the fives are, but then there are small numbers all the way out. It gets fairly wide. So there are some flaws, but fundamentally, it's not a bad design. For me personally, I almost never hold that far out with a reticle unless it's a low power variable. Yeah, I would have preferred to give me some, like MSR reticle adds the couple of extra dots milliradian out. I almost always add a dot half milliradian out, like in all four quadrants. That's not so much to aim with, but to give me reference points on how to correct my holes.
Okay. So you brought up zero comp, and when discussing this one, there was a question: what about the ZCO MPC2X reticle? Was that in some way related to this one?
No, the one that looks a little bit more similar to this is MPC T3X.
Okay.
2X is their tree reticle, 3X is their grid reticle. Now, both are good reticles, but once again, what the tree or the grid really starts about 2 milliradians away from center. That's where I stop aiming with the grid, right? But that's very, they're individual. ZCO reticles are really designed for people who dial a lot, and they work very, very well. And then, but I just use it different. Okay. So the other question was about skmr, and the latest skmr they have is skmr 4. And let me put that on the screen. And so we just saw KAHLES' grid style reticle. This is KAHLES'. This is KAHLES' tree style reticle. Is it reasonably visible?
Yep.
Okay. So this one is actually a nice design. I think skmrs are done for KAHLES by Shannon K, the guy who's sort of in charge of the PRS league. It's not bad. Again, so nice prominent main stadia, 0.2 milliradian hash marks, numbers every 2 milliradian, not bad. There is a 0.035 dot in the center, not bad. 8 mils out, you have big bars, so when you go low power, you get a little bit more visibility. Again, if you're aiming with a primary aiming point, you need to make a quick correction. There's nothing around it to help you. That's just my personal pet peeves, but vast majority of competition shooters are clearly okay with this. It's a successful design. I'm not a huge fan of solid horizontal lines because to me they kind of take up space. They help visibility, but they take up space. And if you look carefully at how the tree is done, the wind holes in the tree are 0.5 milliradian. space. But the wind holes in the main stadia are 0.2 milliradian space. And
Yeah.
this transition to thinking from 0.2 to 0.5 by just looking at different part of the reticle, to me, is not ideal. A bunch of people clearly shoot really well with it. Okay. Another thing that I dislike about this, if you notice, the whole tree is illuminated.
Okay. Yeah.
That works well if you are shooting in reasonably decent light and you just happen to be shooting against a dark background. However, if you're shooting in low light, this tree completely overpowers your primary aiming point and most of the target.
Okay.
And that's a problem with the virtually all large tree reticles that are fully illuminated. I was just screwing around with a bunch of 3 to 18 scopes, and like Element Titan 3 to 18, etc. In when it gets truly dark, none of them are useful. You go lower magnification, the reticle is fairly thin. You turn on the illumination, you don't see shit other than that whole freaking illuminated tree. So the company that does this really well is actually Burris. The way they did with the CR2, there is a fairly prominent green tree, but what's illuminated is a small T shape, like 5 by 5 milliradian, like this.
Yeah.
Works great.
Now, so on the illumination, so does that make it, is that just how it is, or do you think that it's also going to vary based on the price point of the scope and whether the quality of the illumination? So obviously with a lot of the cheaper
Yeah.
scopes, when you turn the illumination on, it's like there's a lot of bleed through, it splatters all over, versus some of the
Mhm.
higher end scopes. It's a little bit, it's bright, but there's not a lot of spillover. It's more or less controlled.
So on low power, you don't want it to be bright. You want it to be faint.
Yeah.
If you're illuminating the whole thing, you have to be able to, on lower settings, to make it incredibly faint. Otherwise, it will absolutely overpower what you're looking at. It will screw up your night adaptation, etc. For competition style scopes, just during the used during the day, that's clearly not a problem.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking of it as a general purpose scope, illuminating the whole thing is an issue. On the higher end razor scopes, for example, Vortex, especially crossover stuff, Vortex switch to illuminating, the primary stadia, right? 5
Mm-hmm.
milliradian up and down, something like that, and left and right, not illuminating the tree. I've talked to guys from Element about it. We are just in disagreement. They're precision shooters. They like the whole thing illuminated. I don't. It's a they should try using one at night.
Yeah.
So, but then again, if
there's
I lived in South Africa, I would be venturing out at night. Either they have big cats out there.
so there's a question earlier. I'm not sure if you answered it or not, but I think it's a good question. Do you think quick ranging features are worth the clutter in the reticle? There's the old school style, like in P4FL, to the new ZCO MPCT3. Does your opinion change for military versus civilian users?
So, quick ranging features are not a bad thing to have if they are out of the way. I think primary arms overdoes it a little bit. The way it's done in the P4FL is not bad. I actually like P4FL. It's not the most modern reticle, but it works. I had a P4FL here somewhere. Where's it? There we go. I'm gonna pop that on the screen so you see what I mean. With modern laser rangefinders, very few people do use reticle rangefinder.
Yeah.
Okay. This is before fell. Where's it? Hold on.
Well, after all those other reticles we just looked at, this looks just so plain.
It's very usable. Honestly, it's a nice it was a nice extension of a general mill dot reticle.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things it did really well, it worked well at all magnifications. You see the thick bars that are comparatively close
Mm-hmm.
to the center, so you go low power, you see it. You have a couple of 0.2 hash marks toward the edges. You can use that for ranging. You have a quick range estimation thing down below. And one of the things you notice, and it's a feature I like, I think it's underused, the primary aiming point is made slightly thicker and slightly thicker, so that it's illuminated and it stands out reasonably well on lower magnifications. Okay. because if you are shooting finite size objects, this primary aiming point doesn't need to be that thin. Okay?
Okay.
How thick it actually needs to be is arguable. It depends on whether it's a dot or a cross. There are different ways of doing it. But I know this approach generally works, and once again, it looks very plain, but I've used it quite a lot, and it has generally not slowed me down all that much. Okay. Here's an interesting question. I'm just looking in order for Mr. Scorpion Outdoor Products. In regards to the thickness of the main horizontal and vertical line, what would be good for being able to see at low mag and not appear super thick on full mag safety power? It's a very good question because there is no answer. It depends to some degree on the field of view of the scope and what else is there. For example, when you have all these 0.2 milliradian spaced hash marks, when you go down on lower magnification, they make the whole line appear thicker than it really is. They actually help visibility. The best solution, in my opinion, something I've used, is to vary line thicknesses. So what I've done a couple of times, I would stuff from 2 milliradians and in, and I think MSR2 reticle does it as well. The lines are fairly thin. They're a little bit thicker outside, and there are a couple of slightly thicker structures in the very center to aid visibility. So the idea being is that when you really zoom in on your 30, 35, 40 power, have this thinner stuff in the middle. That's how I did the March reticle. So you're not blocking too much, but when you go out in lower power, the lines that are moving in from the sides are a little bit thicker for better visibility. A lot of it is also individual, and then on top of it, depending on what you're illuminating and how you're illuminating it, you may be able to get away with thinner lines if you depending on battery power. With high magnification front focal plane scopes, I generally will not use one without illumination. Unless it's fairly inexpensive. Anything reasonably expensive, I want it illuminated because on low magnification, it really helps. Alex always has a good question. Ilya, can you please get your thoughts on reticles such as the DTR or Tremor 3 and more standard modern tree designs in Bear 7 and the like? So we touched on it a little bit, so I'll summarize it in a couple of sentences. So Tremor 3 is a mosquito net designer's wet dream. It's an abomination of the reticle, and we shouldn't use it. How's that? It's just a bad design all over. Like, it's a mill grid reticle, you can use it, but primary aiming point is not well defined. You go low power, it's just a mesh. Go high power, there's a bunch of crap you have to try to ignore while you're using it. It's a piece of manure. Standard tree designs like EBR7, they're perfectly viable. I like the 7D, the latest one that Vortex has the most, because they got rid of some of the clutter along the horizontal. It works adequately well. For people like Max, a 10 milliradian tree is not enough. For me, it is, but no, I can see why it would be enough. I think.
Oh, and I know I'm unique. I know most people are just 10 is going to be more than plenty for most people.
So for me, 5 is enough. For most people, I would say that 12 is enough, and I come up with the number 12 for a very simple reason. For most commonly used cartridges, you will run out of supersonic range within about 12 milliradians.
Yeah. So, and I guess I'll flip this one into it. I mean, routinely, I'm maxing out the internal elevation. So the kick I've been on recently is extended rimfire shooting,
Yes.
where it's so I have a Titan on my Gucci 1022, and so I mean the scope is maxed out at 300 yards. So we're dialing in about 17, 18 mils, and then so anything beyond that, the scope is completely maxed out. Plus, then you start holding over, and once you I mean, it's not that difficult to go beyond the 10, and that's partly why I'm excited about some of the newer scopes that are coming out, especially when it's a firearm where you can't stick on it comes with a flat rail. It doesn't come with a 20 or 40 MOA rail, and where you really do need more adjustment. And the first time I actually ran into this issue, so when it was at a Ruger Media Day, when we're for the launch of 300 PRC Ruger precision rifles, So when we're shooting at a mile with the Leupold Mark V HDs, we're able. So and that's a 35 mil internal elevation. So we were dialed in for right around 17, and you're fine at a mile. But then we started stretching to 2,000, 2,100, 2,300, and at 2,300 yards, the scope is maxed out with the 18, 17, 18 mils we dumped in there. Plus, you have a 30 MOA rail. We ended up having to hold over about another 13 or 14 mils. And the problem was it was the basic reticle. Like you're in no man's land, kind of like trying to pick it
Yeah.
somewhere there. But obviously, it's not an issue that most your typical gun owners are ever going to face. But it's like once you start getting out there, if you do find the opportunity to go there, you quickly appreciate, hey, you know what, this is actually what I needed. And I guess it also kind of means like I think it's kind of like the advice I give people on my channel. It's like, look, it's like when you're getting into it and you're buying your first or your second first focal plane reticle rifle scope, and when you don't have a strong preference or you don't know what features you absolutely need, just get something cheap so that you can develop and find out what your needs are. So then you really kind of start understanding where like a lot of these reticles, it truly is personal preference, or it could be personal preference for the specific type of shooting that you're going to be doing. And I'm sure Leah has like, well, for this type of shooting, I want this reticle. For that type of shooting, I want more. So like with this one, because it has the ample internal elevation adjustment, the only guns I'm planning on shooting it with are some long range 22s and 8.6 blackout, because that thing drops like a rock. For other scopes, well, there's other scopes where I have a little bit of a better reticle that I might like a little bit more, that I might not need all that internal elevation adjustment. And I think kind of, like you just see me answering, like when I started looking and I saw the Tremor 3, I thought it was cool as shit. I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. I can't wait to be able to learn and use all of these features. But then like I start taking shooters out and even showing them like a basic Christmas tree style reticle in the
Mhm.
Vortex Venom or the Element Titan. They're like, oh, like they get easily confused. So I can't even imagine when you give them like a primary arms Athena or a Tremor or a Horus, like they might go completely crazy. Like,
You
what am
want
I looking at?
when you want to hear something funny?
Go ahead.
So the reason the U.S. government adopted this whole Horus insanity is that the guy who sold the military on it convinced them that it would simplify training.
Well,
Yeah.
you know what? I suppose it does from the perspective of it's like once you learn how to use it and use the holdovers, and then like you don't need to convert mils to MOA and this and that, it can simplify it. But I mean, like
And
it's
yet
like,
they all use it as long as a normal military reticle.
yeah,
So no, it's a bunch of nonsense. So you like I have an article coming out in Guns and Ammo on Refi ALR on the budget, and Element Titan is one of the scopes
yeah,
I talk about there. It's going to be out in a couple of months, maybe a little more. Um, to shorten the whole thing, I routinely shoot 22 long rifle to about 600, and subsonic 8.6 blackout and 300 blackout to about 800. So having to dial and hold for 40 milliradian is not unusual for me, and you kind of have to set up for it. And there's modern scopes with lots of adjustment help, and then you have to hold with the reticle. But all of that is a comparatively exotic application.
yeah,
I have some setups specific for it, but basically, if you want to do that, I'm gonna shorten. If you want to go take a 22, make sure it's accurate. You want to shoot really far away. Get a slope trail, then you get Burris XTR signature rings, so you can use the inserts to dial in a little more slope
yeah,
and use as much scope adjustment as possible. And for that, actually, so the new GLX from Primary Arms, the 320
yeah,
by 24, is great. It has more than 50 milliradian of internal adjustment,
yeah.
and the center of the reticle is fairly thin. I don't And during the day it works okay, right? My
Right. Actually,
main issues with
I
it
have that
in
scope here.
before
I
and after.
have it in the box in front of me.
I also have it at home. I'm currently in Denver.
Yeah, but it's not for me. It's for a Canadian friend. Um, so they shipped it to me, and I shipped it to him. I'm like, oh yeah, because I wanted the new 5 to 25, I believe.
5 to 27, is it?
Yeah, something like that. Because I have the first one which we did was like the 6-24. And I'm like, okay, well this is fine, but it seemed a little too much for the money, and like the reticle wasn't that great. But when I played with the new one at Primary Arms Day before NRA, I was like, wow, this is actually pretty freaking nice.
Yeah.
So
So the GLX, the 318 is very interesting. It's a very decent scope. It's clearly a step up from the early GLX generations. The problem is that the competition also stepped up in terms of
yeah,
pure optical quality. Stuff like Element Titan or even Vortex New Strike Eagle is actually a little bit better. What GLX does, and GLX has comparative, still has comparative narrow field of view, but it has a ton of adjustment. Optical quality is good, did step up, and it is really has really forgiving, really good depth of field, which I like.
yeah.
It's a very easy scope to use. It's a nice scope.
And that one, I guess, for people who are still allergic to Chinesium, I mean, that's really going to be an option
Yeah, that's
because I think
Philippines. Yeah.
it's Philippinesium.
But anyhow, so Alex's question: DTR. DTR is David Tubbs reticle, and it is a. Let me see if I can pull one up. Picture. It is a very complicated side picture, but DTR is basically an ultra sophisticated version of a of a
BDC.
of a BDC reticle. I'm trying to find a good picture because David has this demo on his website. Uh, Jesus, how do I zoom in with this thing? That when you click on it, oh, there we go. When you click on a picture, it fires a shot, and there we go. So I'm gonna put this on my screen, and some of you may get motion sickness.
If it's a video, just make sure we're not actually
It's not the
shooting.
video. It's not the
Okay.
video.
Okay.
It's just theoretical. I'm just not gonna click on it. So David has a complicated side picture. There is a density. There's all sorts of calculators in it. There's an odd reticle. There is this weird grid that is all over the
It's not
place.
up.
It's not up.
No, you didn't
Oh,
put
I
it up.
see it now.
There you go. Cool.
See it now. So
Yes.
David has all sorts of calculators up top.
Actually,
It's a weird
also
skewed off reticle.
hide the comment because the comment is blocking a lot of the lower end of the reticle. Perfect.
There we go. Okay. It's a complicated reticle. It accounts for spin drift and all sorts of other stuff. It fails a little bit on my basic criterion of having a strongly prominent primary aiming point.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, it kind of works if you stay in it, right? Because David basically has this whole 60-page manual that walks you through how you do it. You go through it a couple of times, it's not bad. But it like when you go down to lower magnification, the primary aiming point is not super prominent. But if you have it
Yeah.
eliminated, it's not too bad. And if you zoom in, notice that he has numbers going vertically, numbers going horizontally, numbers in the center, different structures, holes, etc.
Okay, I will
But
say this. I think David is a Satanist because so in the middle line, the only number that's there is 666, but there's no like 555. 6 is the only one that's there in the middle.
yeah,
Okay, well, I think 8 as well.
yeah, there's also 8. Yeah, there's,
Just
but even
saying.
at the others,
I'm sure it means something.
it means something. It's not for everyone. When I first looked at it, I said, "Holy cow!" Then I spent some time on it. It does work, but it's very difficult to switch between a conventional middle and VTR and go back and forth with all of that making sense. But once again, it does work.
And David's reticle that's only still currently available just in the Mark V, correct?
Yeah, he'll put it in any scope you want, but it's a somewhat limited market. He has a good relationship
Yeah.
with them. I actually, to me, it's of most interest in the 3.6 to 18 by 44 Mark V on a gas gun, something like $6.5 grand. Because believe it or not, once you get a hang of it, this reticle can be used at distance quite quickly, and you never have to look away. You never have to do anything else. It's all through the scope.
So would that reticle almost like be better for somebody who's gonna buy once, cry once, they're gonna get like one gun and they're gonna learn the heck out of it, rather than somebody like me or you who's gonna have 30, 40 different guns with a scope on each one, and like to us it's almost like
And
interesting.
3040, that's in which safe?
Yeah, I know. Well, I didn't want to disclose anything. So it's but you know, I mean, it's like we'll
I know
have
what
like
you
different scopes, and it's
look.
almost like it's interesting to collect different scopes and reticles. It's like,
If I didn't have so many scopes, reticles, and guns, I would have been a much better shot. If your purpose is to be a good shot, buy a nice rifle, buy a nice scope. Almost doesn't matter which one, as long as it's high quality design with decent reticle, and go practice. And you'll be better than me in about 6 months. Okay. But I like playing with stuff, so here we are.
yeah, I guess to us, it's about the journey, not the end destination.
It's about both, but I can't help myself.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
okay, but you are starting to help yourself. You've rejected some companies who are trying to send you stuff.
Yeah, quite a few. All my YouTube friends don't understand how people are trying to send me stuff, and I politely decline. All right.
Ooh.
One and only Sherlock. I love the name. Do you think dual focal plane reticles will become more popular? They seem like a good option for high zoom ratio rifle scopes with low bottom average, 1 to 10, 1.5 to 15, 2.5 to 20. Are they a good option? Yes. Are we going to see a lot of them? Probably not. They're hard to make, basically. They're hard to make. They're hard to make in quantities. They're hard to make consistently. They work all right for companies like March or Schmidt when they want to do it because they have very high consistency and quality of assembly. On the budget, it's very hard to do. And the advantage is that you have good visibility, low power, and good granularity on high power. You can get the same effect with the diffractive reticle. Basically, which allows you to have very bright illumination with very small structures. That's what is used in a Gen 3 1 to 10, in an Attacker 1 to 8, and an X8 1 to 8, and Schmidt 1 to 8 uses it as well. And it's from an assembly standpoint, it's more expensive components, but much cheaper assembly. So I don't know if we'll see a huge number of dual focal plane scopes. When March wanted to do something like this, I told them you can either do diffractive reticle or dual focal plane because they have a very high assembly quality. They chose to do dual focal plane. That's sort of my doing. I'm not consulting for March now, but I did for a while, and that was one of the things I was involved with. It has its strengths and weaknesses. So when we are dealing with, for example, low power variable scopes, so basic scopes with a low magnification, low end, there are two different schools of thought on how to treat the reticles in low power. The more common European school of thought is trying to make it look like an aim point, like a red dot. So what they want an edge reticle to essentially disappear on low power, and then they want to have an illuminated bright dot, and you have an experience as close to a red dot as possible. That's what Schmidt and Bender does with the dual CC scope, and that's what a few of them do. Another school of thought is to, when you go on low magnification, toward lower magnification, to have all the complexity sort of fade out of the field of view and have a simple prominent edge reticle visible. That's what dual focal plane design does for you. It makes you less dependent on batteries, but it is a less clean side picture in the grand scheme of things. And which one you prefer ultimately is very individual. I can live with both. I can see use in both. I don't know which one I like more. I can think of a combination of the two that would actually be awesome, but I don't think anybody's going to do it. It's expensive. But But from an assembly standpoint, I don't think we'll see dual focal plane reticles all that much. Burris tried to do it in the Philippines; it was okay. But I think they tried to do it, and something goes all the way down to 1 power, and they couldn't quite do it consistently. Maybe in the future somebody can, but I don't know if I'm going to hold them back. On the high end, you'll see dual focal plane designs. You can do clever things with it. All right, moving on. Can you touch on Plum reticles? Yeah, so Plum reticles are basically reticles that have this weird funnel up top that is also designed to use for edging BDC. Frank Plum is a force Plum, I think, special forces guy. I don't know him. By all accounts, he's a nice guy. He somehow managed to go get a patent on it. The patent is not valid. One of the companies he tried to sue actually reached out to me a while back asking, has this structure been done before? And it has. Leopold actually used it in the late 80s. So
Okay.
the whole idea of Frank Plum design is complete nonsense. Um, the actual design kind of works. It's basically a choke style rangefinder, except to choke things up horizontally rather than vertically. It's reasonable. The problem with it is like with all choke style rangefinders, once you start going out to longer distance, you have these mildly curved lines that are very close together. It's very hard to figure out what's what. Inside of 500 yards, it works fine. All of the implementations of the Frank Plum design I've seen to date have tried to look further than that, and it becomes a hot mess. You basically, it blocks too much and all that. So within 500 yards, perfectly viable. Past that, it's not great. Steiner put a Frank Plum reticle in the new dual focal plane 1:8 design. It's a very, very nice scope, other than the reticle. I had a picture somewhere. I'm looking for it. I really like the scope, though. Let me see if I have it here. If I don't, Steiner, where's Steiner? When was I looking at it? Do you remember when I was looking at it? It was right before Shot Shahid.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have been December of 2022. Tripods, night vision, thermal. Oh, Steiner. Okay, here we go. I am going to show you a reticle. So this is the non-illuminated version. Illuminated reticle added a couple of like a donut shapes on top of it. Can you see it fairly well?
Yes. I'll probably, if you can zoom in just a little bit more. Yeah, that's better.
Okay. So basically, so the plum part is these curved lines.
It looks like a uterus.
Uh, get your mind out of the gutter. So the outer lines are supposed to range on a human chest, and the inner thin lines here are supposed to range on a human head.
Okay.
Ranging the human head at 500 yards is a shit show. On top of it, here it's also 500 yards and 500 meters, and then there is a milliradian grid, and then horizontal there is a million hashes and stuff like that. I don't know. Primary aiming point is somewhat compromised. You have all these little crosses here,
Yeah.
which will ready the part to aim between the crosses and the curved lines. This is a mess. If you shoot with anything here and you miss, you will not see where you missed. It's hard to do corrections. It's hard to work your shots in. With low power variable scopes, you kind of have to do it. One of the European militaries actually adopted this scope,
Okay.
but with a slightly different version of the reticle. And the diffractive reticle brings in a very bright illuminated dot there. The scope that's commercially available in the US has these two kind of a half horseshoe shapes.
Okay.
I may have a. I don't see. Hold on. Let me see if I have. The first one they sent me was a prototype, and it wasn't evenly illuminated. I want to see if I have a.
You looked at a scope that didn't come with illumination? You traitor.
No, it had illumination, but it wasn't uniform. And I'm trying to see. Oh, there you go. This is what it looked like illuminated on 1 power. There are all sorts of reflections there. This is the picture.
We
Was
don't see
just
it.
you'll see it in a second.
Okay.
There's a picture that I was screwing around with in my garage.
Okay.
Okay, this is
Wait,
what it looked
was
like
that the
illuminated.
T6i, I believe?
This is M8XI.
Okay.
So one of the problems here is that these illuminated structures are diffractive, and it's a little bit too large for diffractive reticles. You see, it fades out a little bit to the side
Mm-hmm.
here slightly. It's still very quick and stuff, but with the diffractive reticle, you have a limit on how large of an area you can illuminate. This is on 1 power, and one of the things that Steiner did very well is see these 3 bold lines.
Mm-hmm.
I actually like that a lot. Even if your reticle dies up close and personal, these three
Oh yeah.
lines are enough to bracket something in between that, at close range and shoot something. If I were Steiner, this outer horseshoe-looking thingy, I would just yank that out and just leave the inner one, and
Mm-hmm.
it would work fine. And I think the version of the reticle that was adopted in Europe does not have this outer horseshoe. I think it's just the inner horseshoe or a big dot somewhere, something like that. The nice thing is that what the diffractive reticle can do for you when you turn illumination off, it basically fades out. You don't see it. It's something called a phase grating. So there's amplitude grating and phase grating. This is a phase grating. So very nice scope. Generally works well. Other than the Plum reticle, it's awesome. So I never promised to be nice to anyone, and I'm generally not. So there's no need to start today. Okay. Michael Jones would like to hear your opinion on Gen 3 XR, especially compared to Tremor 3. Well, I think I've already touched on the Tremor 3. Gen 3 XR, I like. I have a Tangent Theta 5225 with the Gen 3 XR, and I've had a chance to provide some input into that reticle. I'm looking for a picture of Gen 3 XR. I think I had one pulled up somewhere. No, no. I do not see it. Give me 1 sec. So I have 2 tangents. One with Gen 2 XR, one is with the Gen 3 XR. There's Gen 3 XR. I like them both. I like the Gen 3 XR more. It's a more modern reticle. Generally, not a bad reticle to discuss. It's a very nice example of a modern 3-type reticle.
Oh. Sorry. I'm not sure if you. So while you're discussing, I just got an email from Armament Tech for Tangent Theta. They just announced a new Tangent Theta Gen 2 MOA ER reticle.
Okay.
I will forward you that email.
Why? It's an MOA reticle. Like, I'm sure there's a reason for MOA reticles to exist. I'll be damned if I know what it is. Okay, here's the Gen 3 XR. You can see it well enough?
Yep.
Okay. General purpose 3-type reticle, 10 milliradian tree, very common. Tangent has the right idea on this. They're trying to not bring in extra crap that you don't need. Aiming dot in the center, hashes of different lengths, every 0.2 milliradian, so you can easily tell which is which, and every 1 milliradian there is a dot. Near the center, see
like
just
that.
below, they have dots at 0.2 milliradian, but then they don't propagate it through the tree. That's slightly controversial, but it's not a bad way of doing this, because they're trying to keep the tree fairly unobtrusive.
Mm-hmm.
One of the very clever things that they do, the stuff that's in red is what gets illuminated. They illuminated more than just the central stadia, but not the whole tree, right? So you see the vertical and the horizontal are illuminated, but in the tree, only these little crosses every
I
1
like that.
milliradian are
Yeah, that's
illuminated.
cool.
So Tangent and Schmidt and Bender do this very clever. This sparse illumination gives you some wind references should you need them, but doesn't
Yeah.
overpower you. If you try to illuminate everything, it gets overpowered. But another thing the tangent does, the illumination can be dialed extremely dim. And in truly low light, you want it to illuminate it to the point where you can barely see that it's red.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and tangent does this very well. If I were to change anything, you see these two half milliradian dots here, just below the center to the left and right. So I would add two more above it. That's what I always do. I always like to have a couple of hold under features.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I learned to like over time, and you see it in some of the reticles, like Night Forces MiLXT and a few others, I will frequently, if I have, let's say, targets to shoot at 5, 6, and 700 yards, for an example, I'm going to dial to 500, and then 6 and 700 I'm going to hold with the
Yeah.
reticle, right? But here's the catch. I'm still shooting fairly far away, and if I have a lot of wind, I may need more than 1 milliradian of wind. So I've learned to like the tree reticles that even just below the horizontal give me a couple of milliradians of wind hold.
Hmm.
Here I only have one.
Yeah.
Normally, if you hold purely with the tree, meaning your 100-yard aiming point, and then just go from there, you just hold with the tree, you almost never encounter so much wind at a couple of 100 yards that you need more
Yeah.
than a milliradian of hold. But if this 1 milliradian down from center is your 700-yard hold,
Yep. That's a
you might
different
have some
story.
trees. So,
Yeah.
but this is a very competent reticle, and here's the catch: because we have turrets, I'd rather have a reticle that's lacking a couple of things that has 28 things I don't need. Right? My personal taste for these things is when there's a choice, I'm going to err on the side of a little bit less clutter.
Yep.
Okay? Make sense?
Absolutely.
And because we're going to err on the side of a little bit less clutter, I'm not going to put trap out three on the screen. It's just a mess. Let's see. What else? Aim Gabriel goes, I find it insulting that my right eye is now worse than the left. Look at it as a glass half full. At least you have one normal eye. Hopefully both are screwed up.
That's why you have the fast focus eyepiece adjustment.
Yes. March dual focal plane LPVO. I think I talked a little bit about LPVOs. So that reticle I was not involved with. I looked at it at different time. It's okay. It's not ideal. There are a couple of things about it. It's a little bit odd, but like that very populated line at 5 milliradian, but it generally works okay. I have one, didn't slow me down very much. Digital reticles, I think we talked about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we'll
Yep, we hit those.
Uh, so we talked about the quick ranging features in the clutcher. Okay. Could they work with design reticles? We talked about that.
I think the next unanswered is at 11:01. What's your favorite first focal plane reticle for a crossover scope? I'm yet to find a reticle that is nicely visible under 5x that isn't in a LVPO. And he wrote it LVPO. I just read the comment as LVPO. Don't hark on me.
That we're supposed to be doing a live translation. Okay, there's something weird happening with comments. Okay, I'm gonna went and started going back. Okay. I missed the full stickiness here. Wow. What area? That's from Mega Gooch. I have no idea how to pronounce it. What is your favorite FFP reticle for a crossover scope? I'm yet to find a reticle that is nicely visible at the 5x that isn't an LPVO. Oh,
And because he said LVPO, he's not going to answer that question.
because you're not Slav Guns, I am going to answer that question. So not an LPBO. So the new reticle that March is putting into 1.5 to 15 by 42 is actually not bad. I'm about to send mine back for them to replace the reticle. That's a dual focal plane design. So that's visible across the board. Now with some changes. Aside from that, you're right. There really isn't a ton. And basically, what you have to do, you have to rely on illumination on low power. Most companies who do this don't pay enough attention to this. It is possible to make a nice one. You have to use variable line thicknesses and stuff like that. No one, to the best of my knowledge, has done it. I will say the Neil Reese reticle and the Swampbox 2 to 10 is actually not too bad. Okay. So that's the question about MPC T2X. It's a nice reticle. It's where's this? Yeah. That's the recent one they introduced. There we go. Found it. Just to make sure, I think that's well the outer funnel, and it has a nice 0.2 milliradian base tree. It's loading up. It's loading up very slowly. Oh yeah, I see. Yeah. Okay. I'm sharing this, and I'm going to share the other one. Okay, can you see it?
Nope. Yes.
It's a very nice reticle. Once again, it's not for my style of shooting because there are no real holes between the primary aiming point and 2 milliradian down. So it's just a different style of shooting. Outside of that, I think they did a very good job. Once again, I don't like that the whole tree is illuminated, but the CO does illumination very, very well, so they can make it very dim. So it's not too bad. They have the vertical up to about 3 milliradian above center. I think that's quite nicely useful. Nice small dot in the center. All the hash marks are nicely defined. Notice that everything is 0.2 milliradian based. As an example, every which way you go, everything is based on 0.2 milliradian. The numbers are every 2 milliradian. You look at the tree, everything, all the hash marks are 0.2 milliradian apart. You have a very consistent way of counting and holding across the entire reticle. I think it's a very nice design.
Well, and you still have the half 0.5 on top of the bar.
Correct. Yeah, that's a very common thing as well. Yeah. I think it's very nicely done. I think this is one of the better modern reticles, assuming you want a very open center, which a lot of people clearly do. I don't have, other than some personal preference, I really don't have anything bad to say about this one, which is unusual for me. I can usually crap over pretty much anything.
Yep,
it's a special skill of mine. CDOS did a recent review of the NX8 2.5 to 20. Do you have the same criticism of the MIL-XT in that MPVO? If you concur. So I haven't watched that video. I'll be honest with you, the only CDOS videos I watched were the ones that somebody sent me and asked for my opinion on. He's a nice guy. He makes nice videos. He doesn't know what he's talking about, so I don't genuinely watch him. Unless I'm looking for something specific, or unless he mentions me. I should watch more of the YouTube videos from different guys just to see how they do it. They have good production quality that I don't. My basic problem is that it makes me want to hit my head against the wall half the time. MIL-XT is a good reticle. I don't think it's a great reticle for 2.5 to 20. I think it works better in high magnification designs. I think on 2.5 it's not ideal. but it's not a bad reticle. I've seen much worse. If you look at MIL-XT, since that was brought up, let me see if I can find it.
Yeah, in the meantime, so be honest, are you still not over that video where an Arkin is as good as a Schmiff and Bender?
Oh, that's by Tiba, whatever, the Tiberasaurus dipshit, whatever his
Yeah.
name is. Yeah. Uh, I don't know what to, I don't. I have no words. Like, yeah, with Arkin, I don't need any more Schmidt and Benders. Okay, I'm not. Like, I don't know what to say about that. I don't know what can be said about that. I mean, it's a level of shamelessness that is difficult to achieve. I think it's a fundamental zenith of human achievement to be able to say that with a straight face. And the funny thing about this Tiberasaurus Rex guy, he when he wants to say something profound, he does this thing where he raises his eyes to the camera, he holds his paws, he makes this constipated face like he's holding in a fart, and says something stupid. Like he makes that face, I know the next thing that's gonna come out of his mouth is gonna be so fundamentally stupid I might fall out of my chair.
And that is why he does not watch a lot of other YouTubers, because that is the reaction he would get. Although
I
we need a Dark Lord Reacts channel. That's really what you should try to experiment with.
I'm no longer a young man. My heart can only take so much. Okay, here's MIL-XT, which is, according to several PRS shooters, one of the better currently available precision reticles, and I can see why. They did a lot of things right. There are a couple of things I don't like. They're very minor nitpicks. Let me share it with you, and I'll explain why I really like this reticle.
And while he's sharing it, so if you do want to see Dark Lord Reacts, make sure you hit the like button and share this live stream, because I would love to see that.
So how about we do this? If there's enough demand, we will do a Dark Lord Reacts, but you're gonna have to be moderating them.
Okay.
Okay? We'll find a way to set this up.
We'll set this up. So we'll find the clips. Find the clips that you guys want to see him react to. We'll email it. We'll queue it up, and then he'll react to the first time he watches that video and clip.
Yeah, and
Oh, this is
I
gonna.
want names and addresses because that's gonna drive me into alcohol. And after I die, I'm gonna make sure that I take a picture of my liver during the autopsy and send it to you.
Can I have your March scopes?
No,
Okay.
I'm gonna outlive all of you. I'm an irritable old man. I fully expect to live forever. So here's a Night Forces Meal XT. It's big enough. You can see it all right.
Yes.
So lots of things he had done extremely well. And it was one of the earlier designs of this type. So 0.2 milliradian based. There are 0.2 milliradian holes across the board with occasional 0.5s interspersed. Okay. On the vertical, you see the 0.2 milliradian marks go kind of snake back and forth around the primary steady. I don't like that very much, but it's
Yeah,
a
I
minor
don't
thing.
either.
Like it's not my thing, but clearly a lot of people clearly like it. It's a stylistic thing. On the horizontal, I don't mind it because once again, I want to see left-right symmetry, up-down. I don't care.
Hmm.
But outside of that, notice 1 milliradian down, I have 3 mils of wind hold. So for the way I shoot, that's actually perfect. They have numbers of alternating size. So 2, 4, 6 are very easy and quick to see. And if you have a chance to slow down, you have more information that doesn't immediately jump out at you. That's done very nicely. They have zero point 0.5 mil dots interspersed with the whole tree. On one hand, it's a little bit busy. On the other hand, like during the day, it's a very useful thing to have. It's very quick and easy to find the right corrections with this thing. Only the primary stadia are illuminated, just the right way of doing it. It's not going to block anything out at night. And generally speaking, if I have to shoot to some somewhat extended distance and poor light, I will dial elevation. I will not trust my ability to see all the small stuff in the tree. So all I want illuminated is what they illuminated. The vertical goes up 5 milliradian above primary. So if you are trying to figure out where the trace is going to be on longer shots, well, you're going to be looking for it right above here. You have a reference point there. Notice that they have numbers by the vertical above center But below center, they took the numbers out to the outside of the tree,
Yeah.
so that in the middle here, where you will be holding, the numbers don't get in the way. I think it's a very nice reticle, really excellent.
What's your take on like the side arrows to the right and left of the
Yeah.
10 mil lines, hollow versus filled?
I don't have a strong opinion on this. I don't remember for sure, but I don't think it's hollow all the way out. I think then it turns into solid.
Okay.
It's not a bad way of doing it. And as you go lower power, it starts looking fairly solid anyway. Nightforce likes these hollow structures. I go back and forth. That far away from the center, I'd probably prefer for them to not be hollow.
Mm-hmm.
But this is not something I'm going to pay a ton of attention to. Yeah, I mean, I've shot with it, it works well.
Yeah.
So, uh, nice, just a nice design, and they were very early with it. A lot of other reticles that came after it came as a response to Neo XT.
But it almost seems like so like we're kind of like looking at different reticles and like when they were designed. It almost seems like as we progress, it's like a lot of the reticles. It's like it's almost like puke. You just want to like throw on as much stuff onto it as possible. So you showed that first original was a Schmidt and Bender or was it a tangent theta, with just the basic rangefinder, and
The
then we
P4
start
file that
adding.
was Schmidt, yeah.
Yeah, and then like we add more and more and more and more. It's like
Well, now it's a little bit too much. So the first was a mil dot, then there was Gen 2 mil dot.
yeah.
P4FL was kind of a Schmidt's improvement on the general Gen 2 mil dot without taking up too much space. Then we had the Gen 2 XR, which is kind of a very sparse tree reticle with a few wind holes every couple of milliradians, stuff like that. And then all the other reticles started. At first, it wasn't too bad, and then Horus showed up and just fucked it up for everyone. Uh, to me, Horus and a lot of other more complicated reticles are just too much.
Yeah.
Gen 3 XR that we discussed from Tangent is a good compromise. Mil XT is a little more than I like because I'm not as much of a competition guy. I like long range, but I'm not a competition guy. I hunt. I do a little bit of everything. For me, it's a little much, but that's kind of the on the upper limit of what I like in a reticle.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be honest with you. If I had to take one reticle that's not my design and use it with all my precision scopes, it would be Schmidt and Bender's grid reticle, Jared. Maybe before we go to the next question, um, it's worth pulling that up. Let me. Do I have a grid reticle anyway here? I don't. Schmidt did something very nice. They on their website they have a whole article on how they develop the grid reticle, what kind of shooting it's for, with lots of detail. I really recommend you guys read it if you haven't. I am going to find the manual for it if I can. I'm not sure I can. Uh, they changed their website and they had a very nice handout for the grid reticle, and that I no longer see. Okay, let's do this. Why do I not see it? Of course I don't see it. It's always like this. When I really need something, it's gonna be gone forever. I'll make one last attempt. If not, I'll pull up what Schmidt has on the website. Of course not. There we go. There's the internet to the rescue. Here is a pretty decent picture. No, that's not the picture I want. Well, the picture shows how it does, or which parts of it are also illuminated. And I am not seeing that. Sorry guys, give me 1 sec.
We're good.
Oh, it's cold. Why when I really need something I can never quite find it? Probably because I have 20 years of saved files in this folder. That's episode 2. Of course, that would be the one where the commandants. Okay, this is. There we go. That's the picture I was looking for. Took a little work, but I found it. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
you see it?
Nope.
No. What was that about them?
Oh, wifey was trying to find me a couple hours ago,
Oh,
even
there
though
we
I'm
go.
hiding out in the basement.
All
Apparently,
right.
we have 2 chickens that are still in the run.
So
Okay.
my neighbor built a chicken coop, bought 11 chicks. They just wanted eggs. One of them turned out to be a rooster with a
We
completely
have one
screwed
too.
up internal. Yeah, the rooster has completely screwed up internal clock. It's time to wake up 24/7.
He's just premature.
We had a discussion, and the neighbor suggested that the rooster needs to go. So they'll need to find a home for it. I'm
You'd
okay with
be
it, but
you'd be
his wife has
surprised.
objections.
You'd be surprised how tough it is to find somebody who wants a brew.
I suggested chicken soup, but his wife objected.
Nuggets.
Yeah, I'm not much of a chicken person. My brother suggested letting it out of that our shooting range and see what we can do, but the way he shoots, the rooster is safe. Okay, this is a Schmidt grid reticle. They spell it as GR squared ID, GR2
Of
ID.
course they do.
It's a very, very clever reticle for several reasons. It's a grid, but it doesn't go below 12 milliradian. 12 is a pretty good compromise size. You have 0.2 milliradian holes all around and half mil dots in the
Mm-hmm.
center. Remember, you asked about that when we looked at the KAHLES reticle.
Mm-hmm.
They have 12 milliradian of hold over and a couple of milliradian of hold under. If you are quickly switching between reticles,
Yeah.
you have that. The primary stadia are a little bit more prominent.
Mm-hmm.
And if you notice, when you illuminate it, it becomes a very sparse tree reticle. So if you're on low light or lower magnifications, you flip up the illumination, and you see a nice sparse reticle.
So
So it
what's
doesn't block
illuminated?
it.
Is it just the vertical and horizontal stadia,
No,
or
do you see
and
there are little red dots here? That just shows here.
okay,
Stuff that's red, that's what gets
got it.
illuminated.
Yeah, it's tough to see it at least at my laptop.
Yes.
Okay, so it's just the dots, not the grid.
So some of the dots, and not everywhere, every 2 milliradian, and
Oh, okay, I
5
see that.
here and here,
Got it.
and the stuff in the bottom right, it becomes a sparse tree, and a few dots here and there. So not the whole thing. It is surprisingly usable in low light. It doesn't blot things out. It
So
works
why
really well.
did they go down from 2 to 3? Like it
Here,
goes in. Yeah.
I think it was just showing off.
Okay.
I'm not aware of a reason for it.
Because you know you're gonna hold over for more wind at 1 and 2 mils as opposed to 3.
Correct. I don't know why they did it. One possible reason is to make it quickly visual to isolate where 3 milliradian is.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's one possibility. Another one, they were just showing off. I really don't know. They have some interesting explanations. I don't think they go into this surface, not that I remember. But 3 milliradian of wind is pretty reasonable. Like if I need more than 3 milliradian of wind hold, I'm probably going to start diving. So even where I live, that's not very common. Although last time I was shooting 22, I had 6.5 milliradian of wind at 100 yards. Mountains.
That'll do it.
Yeah. But if I had to choose one precision style reticle, once again, outside of the ones that I designed for me, this is very, very flexible. It looks busy on paper. It's a lot less busy when you look at it in the scope, because all the small lines in the grid are very, very thin. They're 0.02.
Mm-hmm.
But because there is a good number of dots, you still have reasonable visibility.
Okay.
And there is very little I cannot do with this reticle, yet it does not have all the crazy clutter and all the features I have. They're all just milliradian based reticle. There are no weird angle things, strange chokes, rangefinders, 27 different ways of bracket the target you don't know the size of, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So this is a very, very competent, well thought out design. So let's see what else. MR2S reticle. Yeah, that's just a fairly common simple tree reticle. Works just fine. They stole the center structures from me. Didn't even say thank you. Link. That was the question. For the next hunting trip, which one? MIL-XT, EBR7C, XLR2, Gen 2 XR. So for the next hunting trip, the last two work well. XLR2 is the reticle in the Vortex Raise Edge DLHT 4.5 to 22 by 50, and Gen 2 XR is the reticle that is in my tangent theta 3 to 15 by 50. I use the XLR2 to take a sheep at 450 yards, and Gen 2 XR to take an elk at 358 yards. Both worked fine for me. Well, the reticle worked fine. The shooter was a little iffy, but it ended up working out okay. It's amazing what buck fever will do to you. Both MIL-XT and the BR7C are not what I would use for hunting given a choice. Definitely not MIL-XT. EBR7C is usable, but in the scope I have that in right now is a Vortex Strike Eagle 318 by 44. There, the whole tree is illuminated. I don't like that for hunting. I don't think that's ideal. It's doable, but it's not ideal. EBR7D reticle, that's in the Gen 3 Razor, is much closer to the XLR2. That also illuminates only the primary stadia and all sort of stuff.
Okay.
So there is some convergence with Vortex and with others. Where like all the responsible companies are sort of converging on how many features you really need and what you don't, and I'm beginning to scale back on the madness a little bit. But we'll see. So my next hunting trip is going to be. Oh yeah, so yesterday I got notification that I have a mule deer tag in Wyoming, and I have a mule deer tag for New Mexico, and I have an antelope tag in New Mexico. So for antelope, I'm probably going to be using XLR2. For mule deer, I haven't yet decided. I'm going to use.
And this is how you know you're an optic snob. So typically, when people talk about hunts, they're thinking about what gun and cartridge they're going to use. Ilya's thinking about what reticle am I going to use on this hunt?
You've already figured out which guns I'm going to use. The question is about reticles. We can talk about guns if you want. Oh, that's interesting. Same or different option if you were to shoot in an RL Hunter match? Same.
I love this question.
Oh, that is a very good question. My last question. How important is the reticle as far as most important when buying a scope? I would say tracking is number one. Do you think the reticle is just as important as glass? Look, you aim with the reticle. If you can't aim with it, it doesn't matter how well the scope tracks or how good the glass is, right?
And I would say it depends on the type of shooting you're doing. Because I mean, if you're just going to go out to the range and just shoot at 100 or 300 yards, does tracking actually matter?
Well, so I did an article on this once. I probably need to do another one. Actually, I should do another one. I have the appropriate magazine coming out. The most important thing in the rifle scope, in the fundamentals, is that it holds zero. Once it's sighted in, it doesn't shift. That's the most important. After that come tracking, image quality, and reticle quality. And all three are important, and depending on how you shoot, one may be more important than the Every time you look through the scope, you see a reticle. So for me, a reticle is very important. I didn't start doing reticles for people because it is so lucrative or because I needed more headache on my head. I started doing it because I couldn't get the reticle that I wanted. Right? It's one of the things that I've run into this a couple of times. I do occasional consulting. I really enjoy it. I don't need to make more money in my day job. Biggest reason I started doing this, other than general curiosity, that I couldn't get the reticle designs that I wanted. So if you other people won't do it for you, you have to do it yourself. Okay, there's a clarification on the NX8 question. Use case is a gas gun in 556. For a gas gun in 556, mil-XT is too much. A gas gun in 556, you're never really going to use more than 6 mil radian of holes. So 20 mil radian of mil-XT is just extra destruction. Okay. Oh, Mr. Bullets for Boxes here. Steven, if you're still here, good to see you, sir. As I was just saying, I have a mule deer tag for Wyoming.
Yes, you two are going to eat beer balls together. It'll be an Instagram moment.
That's unlikely. So I mentioned them way earlier, and still just as my inch math. There's no such thing as inch math.
You
There's
skipped it.
inches and there is math.
You skipped a question by link, but I think it's kind of interesting. So,
Where was it?
1131.
Oh, yeah, there you go. This one?
Yep.
Yeah, I missed that. That's right. I think if a buyer pays enough, they should get both glass and reticle. The problem is with the reduced budget. That is very, very true. So, reticles are comparatively inexpensive to make. Making a more complicated reticle is a little bit more money, not that much more money. If a company knows what they're doing, delivering a high quality reticle, even in the budget scope, is not that hard. The big question is whether the companies know what they're doing. More than half the time, they spit out a reticle just because, oh, I know Vortex did that reticle. That sells really well. We're going to change a couple of things so that's not quite like it, and we'll pop it in. And they'll just pop something in without thinking about it, and that might not be optimal because it's a different scope, different everything. Who the hell knows?
I think BDC versus. Yep.
BDC reticles versus ballistic turrets. Oof. Neither. Mil reticle and mil turrets. Look, BDC reticles have their place.
I mean, you might as well throw in the burst veracity where you're just dialing in the distance and it does the rest for you.
That's not veracity. That's what's
not the
something with signature pH or something like that.
That new one.
Yeah, that's like a Revic, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Look, BDCs are fundamentally, once again, David Tubbs stuff accepted, and not terribly accurate. Hunters tend to often like BDC turrets where the turret has a BDC scale for distances. Tactical guys generally prefer BDC reticle, like in low power variables, that kind of stuff. They both work. I don't like ballistic turrets very much because when the conditions change and things like that, I think in mils, and I think it's worthwhile to just figure out what you need to dial in mils and be done with it. And on low power scopes, BDC can be fairly quick, but I don't know. I guess probably BDC reticles is more my thing than BDC turrets.
Yeah, I'm getting ready for this one.
This is totally unfair. He knows I'm not home and I don't have my handy bottle of scotch. And I ran out of coffee. I have a bottle of water now. I guess I'll have to drink. I have to drink something at that place. So I will say this: that the reticles is not the worst part of IUR scopes, but their reticles are kind of interesting. So the true reticle, last I checked, haven't looked in a while. it had these horizontal lines at 5 milliradian and 2.5 milliradian. And the reasoning behind putting a horizontal at 2.5 milliradian, I could never quite figure out.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. You did an IOR reticle in the past, correct or
No,
no?
I've never done an
Okay.
IO reticle. So I don't know. The problem with IR is not quite the reticles. Is there anything you would change in Optica 6 reticle and help make? Yes. See my March reticle that I did afterwards. But there are things there that I would change to every new reticle. I do, it goes in the scope, I go and use it, I go, oh, I need to do this differently, this differently, this differently. It's a never ending process. Lord, any thoughts about creating a new reticle for Miopta? So Miopta was just purchased about 2 weeks ago, something like that.
Who bought them?
Carlyle Group.
Hmm.
Miopta does a lot more things other than sporting optics. So
Yeah.
Carlyle is a huge investment firm. They own a lot of different stuff. Miopta has some military orders. They do some semiconductor stuff. They do a lot of stuff. It's a good sized company. And I don't know if Carlyle bought the whole thing or not. So I have no idea what's going to be happening with Miopta Sport Optics. Is it Carlyle's or did the owners keep it? I don't have any details on the deal. So at this stage, I am not planning to do anything for Miopta. Miopta is a company that's always had the ability to really be a very dominant force in this market, except they never wanted to. It seems like, at least they never put any effort into it. So I don't know if Miopta was going to be doing this or not. Once again, I have no idea either way. Right? Don't interpret this as Miopta getting out of the market. I have no clue. I know that it was just purchased, and I am gonna wait and see if they have some new products coming up and they decide they want to play in this market and need help with reticles. I'll be happy to help them, but I have not had any communications with them, so I don't know. Absolutely love what you did with the reticle in the 3218. I'm glad you like it. There are a couple of things I would fix there too, but it's a very functional reticle. I honestly wasn't expecting you to pull up a reticle that busy. That was probably about the grid reticle from Schmidt.
Yes. Yep.
It looks
The reticle
yeah,
that you picked for yourself.
yeah. It looks a lot busier on the screen than it does in the scope. Look at it in the scope. Took the military a long time to move away from ballistic turrets. There was even when scopes holding zero was sketchy at best. Yeah, ballistic turrets is just an iffy proposition all around, I gotta tell you. Environmental conditions change, ammo changes, temperatures change. Turrets need to be in some sort of a consistent unit trying to do ballistic turrets. It's just a shit show. Okay, we've been at it for about 2.5 hours, and I think we
Yep.
ran out of comments.
Yep.
So, Mr. Slev Guns, you've been thanklessly moderating here. I do really appreciate you showing up,
Thank you.
keeping me in line.
It's an education for me as well.
If you were to pick one precision reticle to use from now on forever, and to be buried with it someday, what would be your choice?
So I don't have a lot of experience with the high-end Gucci, so your ZCOs, KAHLES, those type of reticles. Primarily, I've been playing with the Leupold Mark Fives and down. And honestly, the reticles that I really enjoy shooting with is the SCR2 and the Burris. I just like it's nice, it's clean, it's smooth, it's usable, it has enough holdovers without being too crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, so the one in the Bushnells, I played with it just a little bit more. It wasn't bad. It
Which
was
one?
the one in the Match Pro that they did.
Oh, it's not the G4P. It's the other one.
Yeah,
Let me see. I'll pull it up.
yeah, it wasn't that bad. And then honestly, the one with the tract, it's like I like the reticle, but I can't pinpoint something along to those lines. It's kind of like the tier underneath that. Basically, I would say the tract, the one in the Element Titan. I like that. And I can tolerate the reticles and the arcans.
Okay, yeah, the Match Pro reticle is perfectly reasonable.
Yeah.
Just a Miltree reticle illuminated center.
Yeah,
That's
it's
perfectly
it's
fine.
it's it's like it's one of those that like I don't have to concentrate too much. It's like I can literally just enjoy it and shoot it. Um, but
Yeah,
anyways, like for some reason I kind of have like an affinity towards the Burris reticles. It's like the SCRs. It's like
CR2 is very nicely done. One of my
yeah,
favorite modern designs. Once again, it goes down to let's pull it up. That's going to be the last one we talk about, and then we'll call it quits. Um, I have the SCR2 quarter mil in the Burris XTR Pro I'm looking at, and Burris in the Infinite Wisdom made it difficult to get to. I'm gonna find the user manual for the XTR Pro, and I think it has a radical info in there.
mm-hmm.
There you go. I was hoping to meet with Burris while I'm in Colorado, but they stood me up.
Bastards.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Jordan or Sky.
Sky. It's okay. I've known Sky for a long time. So. Turned out okay because I had another meeting and got stuck. It's I found the right PDF, but it's loading slowly, so
No problem.
just give it a sec.
And I think so. For Bushnell, they released the two new scopes, and I think it was like a somewhat similar reticle on that. And I know when I talked to them, they're like, "Oh yeah," like they're like very proud of the reticle that they did. We're like, "Yep, this is like
I wouldn't be
design."
proud of it, but they can be proud in the sense that it's not a fuck up like their previous radicals.
We're like, "This was designed by competition shooters." Yep.
So that's the statue. I'm gonna blow that up, and I'm gonna put this on the screen. Nope, it's not what I was looking for.
Okay. While you're pulling that one up, so what about non-ballistic reticles, like for LPVOs, hunting scopes where speed is preferred? What's your favorite, T-post or duplex?
Uh, I need to read that because I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah. And I think you covered part of it. So in the beginning, so go Fire Prank, watch the replay in the beginning. He did spend quite a bit of time on that, addressing that.
Okay, I think I finally found the right one. Let me share that. Okay. So this is the Burris XTR Pro. Can you see it?
Mm-hmm.
So here is the whole thing. It's 20 milliradian of holdover in a reasonably structured way. I like the tapered lines coming in from the side
Yeah.
that draws your eye to it. Notice up here, this is all that they illuminated. It works great in low light. I think it's a very good idea. The scope also does both red and green illumination, both of them done very nicely. I think they did a very good job with it. The grid does kind of has this 0.2 holds, which work well on the primary center. They have these hash marks kind of going snaking around, like on the Mil XT. I'm not crazy about it, but it's okay. It's not a big deal. The reasonable numbering schemes, they give these alternating numbers, like I did on the Mi Opta 2, 3, 4, 5. I ended up not liking it too much, but once again, it works. It's not too bad. If you look at it, zoomed in, one of the things I really like about this one is that, see, the primary. Oh, for the love of God. Just trying to cast everything. See, the primary aiming point is this tiny little cross. I like that more than a dot. Really like that. I think they did a very good job with it. It's just a nice, competent reticle. They didn't do anything stupid here.
I honestly, it's like the more I look at them, it's like those tapered lines that bring your eye to center. Like for me, it just works really, really well.
Yeah,
Like I just love those tapered lines.
yeah, yeah. It's a very competently designed reticle. I
Yeah.
have a Sergio Mill in the XTR 3.3 to 18,
Mm-hmm.
and I have the SCR quarter mil, another version of it in the XTR Pro, and they both work, pretty nicely. I'll be honest with you.
Okay.
Okay, there are last couple of questions. I don't like to leave questions unanswered. From 5.6. What about non-ballistic reticles for PVO? So yeah, we talked about that a little bit. I'm not huge on duplexes. The T-post, basic different variants of German number 4. I like having illuminated thing in the center is a good idea. Circle dot designs work fairly well. A lot depends on how well you can do illumination. If your illumination is not great, looking through a dot through a circle is always fast. So number 4s or horseshoes all work totally fine. Chevron is actually interesting. It's a full-up circle dot floating dot chevron. A floating dot is not there for speed. Floating dot is there for precision. If you want to do it for speed, it's going to be very big and compromise precision. Chevrons work pretty decently on low power scopes. They're not a good idea generally on high magnification stuff. Not necessarily a bad idea, but not generally a good idea. So the marketing scheme for the Chevron is that that point is an infinitely small thing that you can use for precision, yada yada yada. Yeah, it's nonsense. That's not how we aim. That's fundamental misunderstanding of how human visual acuity works. But what a chevron does really well on scopes when you want to combine some precision with visibility is that it's just like those little X-wing structures we talked about in the size 6 scopes. It gives you a couple of lines that are going out diagonally that don't really get in the way, yet they provide visibility. That's the advantage of a chevron. And you have reasonably sharp point. It's not great for shooting groups. It's perfectly fine for shooting plates, silhouettes, that kind of stuff. It's reasonable. It's not. It's not a bad thing. But once you start extending it to precision scopes where you're trying to settle on something, get into your natural rhythm, chevron is one of the things that's going to make you try to overcorrect yourself because your brain naturally will try to aim with the center of the aiming point onto the center over the target.
Yep.
Where's the center of the aiming point for a chevron? Nobody knows. So that is not ideal for shooting very small things. But outside of that, it's perfectly viable. Interesting. Dark Lord of Optics. What other options are there with Strelok has got? I don't use Strelok unless I need to make a pretty picture, so I don't know. For ballistics, I don't like the user interface. I don't think it's a very good calculator. Always give me wrong results. Unless I figure out that that's the altitude, it always screws up elevation. I use the geoballistics apps most of the time, and Element just came out with the app. I'm beginning to look at it. It's not too bad.
Yep.
But I use the geoballistics for most things.
Hornady.
Hornady for GOF works just fine.
Or just get a Kestrel.
I have a Kestrel.
Yeah.
I have this watch and a bunch of other things.
Yeah, it seems like basically like now there's a lot of the optics companies themselves are coming in. So you mentioned Element has their own app. You have, I think Tracked Optics just put their own app. I'm just mentioning because it's staring in front of me. Vortex has their own app.
Well, Vortex bought geoballistics.
There you go.
So the reason I'm using geoballistics, I've been messing with Vortex, a new rangefinder, Razor 4000, that talks to geoballistics app. So I got it all paired up. It actually works very nicely. So historically, I've been using a Leica rangefinder paired with a Kestrel. And I ordered the weather flow meter that's just like $100 instead of 700 for Kestrel, to pair it with the geoballistics app and the vortex rangefinder to see if I can get the same performance at the range for $800 total instead of $2,000 total, just to see.
Yeah.
So that's going to be an interesting exercise.
Yeah.
Sterlock is a nice app. Apparently, a lot of people like it because it gives you pretty pictures of the reticle. I never relied on that. I don't trust any of that shit.
They're also, I think, one of the reasons why they're popular. I believe it was the first free public app that was actually really, really, really good. And like, I mean, they just had like a massive embedded user base. And like that's part of the huge reason why they blew up. And then yes, you're right, pretty pictures.
Yeah. I never liked this thing where you get a reticle and you give, okay, this reticle with this element, that's your exact hold, that's your exact hold, that's your exact hold.
But you're special though. You're not your typical gun owner who literally wants that. So I mean, when I went to the FTW, like the classes and like the media events there, the first thing they do is for every scope they print out FTW. It's the private range where we do like 5,000 yard shooting in Texas. They do, so that's where a lot of the companies go there to do media events and stuff, but also their private range where we do long range hunting classes. So basically, what they do for all of our people is like when you go out to the range, whatever the scope is, they're going to print out a pretty reticle chart with your expect based on the ammo. They do say, hey, it's this reticle with this ammo. This is the holdovers. This is your point blank range, etc. So people like that.
It's not a bad thing. So my basic problem with it is, in my opinion, it's a basic misunderstanding of how BDC reticles should be used.
Yes.
People have this notion that you take a BDC reticle, you sight it in 100 yards, and all your long distance holds are supposed to be close enough. It is a great way of setting things up if you plan to miss most of the time.
That's how big of a target you're shooting.
Correct, yeah. If you're trying to hit the wall of a bar from the inside, it works great. The way to do BDC reticles are not for precision shooting. They're designed to be close enough. The most fundamental problem is that when you go out to longer distances, you're losing granularity. The spacings are getting bigger. So what you want to do, you want to find some intermediate to longer part of the range you might end up shooting, let's say 400 yards. And you set it up and you try to make it dead on with your ammo at 400 yards. And what's going to happen is that at closer distances, the hash marks are going to be slightly off. But here's the catch. The same angular off at closer distance is only a couple inches away, while at 500 yards it may be 20 inches away, right? So you want to be dead on at a longer distance and slightly off at the shorter ones, and there you have the maximum usable range with the BDC. Everybody who uses Sterlock does it backwards. They sight it in at a certain distance and just try to see what this long range hold is.
But I will interject here because I do think that mentality is also going to be whether you're an East Coast hunter versus a West Coast hunter. So like while out west you might actually be able to take a shot that far, most people here are not going to be shooting past 300 yards. Period.
Then you don't need the BDC at all.
But it sells, and it's like
All right, we're gonna circle back to that. I don't sell scopes. I'm trying to explain how to use them better.
Yeah, no, it's basically it's for somebody who needs something more than a simple crosshair because they're going to shoot at distances a little bit closer, a little bit further away at 100 yards.
Correct. If your
but they don't want to. Yeah.
If your maximum distance is 300, sight in the 300 hash mark to be dead on at 300, and accept the error at closer ranges because the linear error is going to be small.
But then, how are they supposed to go to the regular range and shoot for fun?
I don't know. I think you're going to have to resolve that problem on your own. All right. What was this one? Did you already address a Leopold 2 to 10? Can you discuss Leopold's interesting reticle decisions in general? I'd rather not. The Leopold has a lot of interesting reticle decisions. I have not tested the 2 to 10 yet. I really liked it. It shot, Leopold's supposed to add another reticle to it this summer, then I'm going to look at it. So I'm going to defer the question on the Mark V 2 to 10 by 30 reticle scope until I spend some extra time with it. March 1.5 to 15 by 42. I'm about to send mine back to Japan to be retrofitted with a revised reticle. Once again, I'm going to defer this discussion. Once I get the scope back, I will talk about it more. Derek is here. Good evening, sir. Just in time. Off topic, feel free to ignore. Thoughts on updated Leica Geovid R LRF binos? Leica does not make bad binos or bad LRFs. It's quite nice. It's not as Geovid R is not quite as nice of a laser rangefinder as a Geovid Pro, but if I remember correctly, but it's still quite nice. Got it. I'll look into the geoballistics. Nobody could give me a good answer on the Strelok replacement. It depends on what you're doing with Strelok, right? If you're looking for something with pretty reticle pictures, Geovid has some of this stuff, some range cards, some other things, but it's not going to be as seamless as Strelok. But as far as a pure ballistic calculator, geoballistics actually does a very good job, and it works.
So go download the Hornady 4DOF app. It's free. Play with it. It'll be good. It has a bunch of ammo already preloaded into it, both Hornady and non-Hornady. And I'm assuming, so I'm skipping through and basically said that you don't have a chronograph right now. So I'm guessing that you also don't hand load your own ammo. Because if you do hand load your own ammo, you are going to get a chronograph. So I'm assuming you're going with regular stuff. Just get the Hornady 4DOF app. It lets you do both what Strelok does and not. And it's a really good app. It's free, and there's a bunch of ammo already preloaded into it.
Correct. So that Tremor 3 is the bee's knees.
I don't know if this is a question designed to get a rise out of you, or...
It may be the bee's knees, just not a good reticle. I've never had a close look at the bee's knees. Maybe it looks like a Tremor reticle. So here's the comment about the chronograph. Look, depends on how far you shoot. If you're shooting far away, you need a chronograph. If you're shooting inside of 300-400 yards and you are able to set up plates of paper that far out, you can work around the chronograph. Walk in your shots, figure out what your holds are at 300 or 400 yards, and figure out what your hold is at 100 yards and calculate it from there. You can true all of this sort of stuff even without a chronograph.
And honestly, like even with a chrono, like if you're at the range and you have somebody who's at the range who has a chrono, just ask him, hey, can I borrow the chrono, or can you chrono some of my lows that I'm shooting? And look, it's like if you're looking at scopes, if you're on this channel and you're looking at scopes, they're $1,000 and up. Go on Amazon and go buy Caldwell chronograph for like $60 to $100, and it'll be more than what you need for vast majority of the people. You don't need a lab radar. Actually, FX Air Guns has a new one, which is like really, really cool. I did a video on that one from SHOT Show, and I should be getting my own very, very soon.
Which one?
The new mini lab radar from the new Doppler radar from FX Outdoors.
Oh, they made one. Did they make one already for centerfire? I have the original one that works with the air guns and arrows and archery.
No, so it's fair competitor to the lab radar, but this one is actually it's much smaller, and I played with the features. The Bluetooth works. I mean, it has a lot of really.
So it works with the centerfire, right?
Yeah, for everything.
Okay, so I need to ask them.
Yeah, I have a preview video that they showed me at SHOT Show. They weren't supposed to show it at SHOT Show, but I did a couple. I was like, I saw that. I'm like, oh my god, this is awesome. And then honestly, so like I was at NRA this year, and the distributor for Lab Radar is also the distributor for the trigger cam, the one that like looks through. And he was just being a giant douche, like complete giant douche. So basically, I'm like, when I saw, well, he's the master distributor for Lab Radar in the United States. And don't get me wrong, I think the Lab Radar is a good product, but it has a lot of shortcomings. So when I found out like FX is having it ready, I'm like, I will go out of my way to make sure that this better product gets out into people's hands.
Okay, that's actually a good point. Let me ping them. I'm about to do some articles on long range. If they already have a working prototype, it will be good
It's
for
ready
them.
to go. They had a prototype at SHOT Show. It's ready to go.
Okay,
It's ready. It's
I'll
ready to
I'll,
ship.
I'll, I'll ping them. Okay, what are your thoughts on a Steiner 7XI scopes made in America and glass from shots? So I think you're confusing them with T6XI. M7XI made in Europe, T6XI are made in US. Seem like nice scopes, but I haven't spent any time with them. It's another deferment because I'm so overbooked right now. I stopped taking in new scopes. Once I work through my backlog, the T6XI is on my list. Fair with a 2 to 10 deferment. Any news on the alternative reticle you saw? Not necessarily scope review. So they have not released it and they asked me not to talk about it. So that's an interesting question. At what range do you actually start using ballistic aids, like a Kestrel applied ballistic stuff?
Can I answer this question with a question?
Yes.
How big of a target are you planning on shooting, and what is an acceptable group size? Are we talking like you want to shoot sub, let's say at 800 yards, you want to shoot sub MOA, or are you going to be shooting 24-inch steel plates and you just need to hit it? And I guess I would also say, are you shooting it out west where you might have like a crap ton of wind, or are you shooting east coast where like we generally don't have any wind, and like all of our ranges are like perfectly positioned north south?
Okay, look, where I shoot to hit an 800 plate, the wind is going to change direction 4 times. It might blow me off of all my 300-pound me out of my seat. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I use ballistic calculators and wind for anything beyond the maximum point blank range, basically.
Yeah.
Sometimes within that, if the conditions are really shitty, but definitely beyond an MPBR, and that distance is different for
Yeah.
different cartridges. Past two
I mean,
300 yards.
so I mean, like my regular range is 750, not 800. But I will basically say, I mean, like we general. I don't remember the last time I had to hold over more than 1 mil for wind. So it's like it's yeah, for reals. It's like it's like we just don't get them here. Um, so it's like it's not that critical, and really, it's like you're gonna start pretty much memorizing for your gun. You're gonna start memorizing what the hold is, and I mean you're gonna be within point one, point two, and then like unless you're getting like a different batch of ammo, and that's the problem though. So it's like if let's say all day you're shooting and you have your gun sighted in and you have your dope worked out for federal gold medal match, and now all of a sudden you switch to federal gold medal match, and now all of a sudden you switch to Hornady. Yeah, you got to start that all over again because I mean there might be a significant difference in it, even like not even just slot to lot, but ammo to ammo. There's going to be a difference, and that's really where a chrono is going to be more helpful. But I think it's far more critical. That's what I say. Honestly, if you just look at the box of ammo, it'll tell you what the expected velocities are, and that's going to get you on target. With almost any of the free apps. I think really where a chrono is going to be critical is if you're doing your own load development. And the way that I use the chrono is not necessarily to dictate what the correction should be, but rather to check myself whether if something is off all of the sudden, I'm looking at the velocity data to see whether it was me, whether something came down range, or it was literally a round that was loaded differently. So I use it kind of like a little bit more as a check tool and as a load development tool rather than as a tool that you actually need. I would say once you start shooting, and Derek, if you're in here, you do a lot more ELR than me. I would say once you start shooting past 12 to 1500, it becomes a bit more important. And where you would actually make shot to shot adjustments based on the ammo, where even being, let's say, for example, like, and also like all ammo is going to be finicky, especially with a lot of the 308. And it's going to depend on whether you're using a temperature sensitive powder or a temperature stable powder. A chrono is, I mean, there might be a difference. So like some of the loads, some of my favorite powders, there might be 100 feet per second velocity difference between whether I'm shooting it in 40-degree weather or 80-degree weather. So that's where chrono is going to be significantly helpful. But I don't think you actually physically need it, not necessarily to 800 yards. Where I will say what you probably should invest in is get like a wind meter, like a Kestrel, because that's going to play a bigger role. And just learning
So
what that's
Kestrel
going
is
to do.
expensive. Weather flow is $100.
Yeah.
I've ordered one. I haven't played with it. It works with geoballistics, works with the vortex laser rangefinder.
Yeah. You just need
Maybe a
some wind
much
meter.
cheaper way
You
to
just
go for
need some wind
shooting
meter.
range.
Or learn to read wind.
Okay, so real quick, Scorpion Outdoors. Is this the pocket thing? And no, it's called the True Ballistic. It's a new one. It's on the FX website. I just found it. The pocket one is the one I have. That's for air guns and archery. The True Ballistic is the one that can measure things up to 4,000 foot per second. So that will let you calculate ballistic coefficients through the cartridge and all sorts of stuff. It's a little bit bigger than the original. It's not quite pocketable, but it's smaller than Lab Radar and looks like it should work well. Okay, I'll get one. And guys, I have a meeting in the morning, so I think I'm gonna have to close this up. Derek, sorry, guy, you just joined, but sometimes I have to remember I have a day job. All right.
Cool.
Thank you all for sticking with me, Mr. Slavguns. Thank you.
Thank you. This is
Really
actually good.
appreciate
I
it.
haven't done like a video or a stream in a while. Like we had like medical stuff. I'm like, hey, you know what? Let me actually go and do this.
Oh,
And then actually, so if you guys heard, so I know Ilya is going to get his hands on one soon. So Track a couple of days ago, we released a new 4 to 25. I did a quick video on my channel, and then Track has like 8 videos on theirs. And if that format looks familiar, that's because I had some hand in going out to the range and doing those videos. I was hoping I would have time to actually do my full detailed video at the range, but no. Mr. John and John had their own agenda for 8 videos they wanted to do, and that took up a lot of time. But that was fun. So I'm definitely looking forward to playing with it, and they're just good people. So
yeah, they're good guys. I had John on here 2 weeks ago, sticking with me. So I like checked scopes. I wish John well. The 425 is a promising design. I'll see what Max has to say, and I'm going to look at one later this summer.
I say honestly, like so, like the biggest thing is like the fact that it's 47 mils of internal elevation adjustment.
It's a
Just
lot.
nuts. It's
Yeah,
nuts.
I might have a voodoo in green fire in mind for that scope.
Nice. And if you guys joined late, go ahead and make sure you watch it from the beginning because there's a lot of really, really, really good stuff, especially in the LPVO stuff. I corrected myself.
Hey, there is hope. I'll get you trained eventually.
Honestly, it just might be like a dyslexia thing on that one. Like it's LPVO.
No, it's not just you. For some reason, everybody thinks LV is easier to say than LP.
Louis Vuitton. It just rolls off a little bit better. And make sure you smash the like button and share this video. And we will be doing a Mr. Dark Lord of Optics reacts. So make sure you find your stupidest optics videos. And we will set that up.
I am so gonna regret agreeing to this.
We'll send and make sure you send a super chat or a super sticker so Mr. Ilya can get a nice bottle of scotch or whiskey. So he'll be able to tolerate.
I just spent 10 days in Scotland. I'm well stocked. For the love of God. All right. Thank you all and good night.